Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. The smell arrived first, a week before Halloween. It was not the familiar, comforting scent of cinnamon and baking apples that drifted from other apartments in the old building on Rue des Messes, nor was it the crisp, clean decay of fallen leaves in the cemetery across the street. This was a sweetness gone sickly, thick as syrup, undercut with the coppery tang of old meat and the faint, fungal damp of turned earth. It seeped from the walls of the apartment their great aunt Alara had left them, an inheritance that felt less like a gift and more like a summons. Maya was the one who noticed it first, of course. She was the sensitive twin, the one who felt the weather in her bones and could sense a shift in a room's atmosphere like a drop in barometric pressure. Rowan, pragmatic and grounded, initially blamed it on the building's ancient plumbing or a dead mouse in the walls. But as the days bled toward October 31st, the smell grew, becoming a pervasive presence that clung to their clothes and hair, a ghost of a scent that followed them even into their dreams. The apartment was a time capsule overlooking the sprawling, Gothic expanse of Relaxation cemetery. Its windows were eyes staring eternally at a city of the dead, where tombstones and mausoleums stood shoulder to shoulder like a silent, stony crowd. Alara had been a recluse, a woman of strange habits and stranger collections. Her home was a labyrinth of overstuffed bookshelves, curios under glass domes, and vintage Halloween decorations that seemed to have been left out all year. A porcelain jack-o'-lantern with a leering, hand-painted grin sat on the mantelpiece, its candle never lit. A string of faded, cardboard black cats danced along a windowsill, their silhouettes twisted into unnatural poses. The twins, bound by the intense, sometimes suffocating connection of identical siblings, had arrived in Paris hoping for a new start, a escape from their own shared ghosts back in America. But the apartment on Rue des Messes offered no escape. It was a place of thresholds, a liminal space between the bustling city and the silent necropolis. And as Halloween drew near, the veil in the apartment felt thinner than anywhere else. The first omen was not a sound, but a blur. Rowan, sorting through a box of Alara's papers, glanced up and saw a figure reflected in the dark glass of the window. A woman in an old-fashioned, high-collared dress, standing between the rows of headstones. When she turned, the figure was gone, leaving only the impression of a pale, elongated face, like a smudge on reality itself. She dismissed it as a trick of the light, the fatigue of travel. Maya, however, began to dream. Vague, waterlogged dreams of walking through the cemetery, not under the sun, but under an enormous, orange harvest moon. The paths shifted and turned in on themselves, the bare branches of the trees reaching for her like skeletal fingers. In these dreams, she was always following the smell, that cloying sweetness, toward a specific, ornate mausoleum, its door slightly ajar. She would wake with the taste of copper and rotten apples in her mouth. The line between the dream and the waking world smeared like wet ink. Their neighbors were characters carved from the same strange stone as the building itself. There was Madame Desjardins, the ancient concierge who smelled of mothballs and whispered warnings about the night when the dead walk abroad. She would leave small bowls of salt by their door and mutter about the importance of the proper offerings. Then there was Luke, a brooding artist who lived in the attic studio and was obsessed with capturing the true face of the cemetery in his paintings. His canvases were a riot of autumnal colors: burnt orange, deep crimson, pitch black. But the human figures he painted among the graves were always blurred, their features indistinct, as if they were moving too fast for the eye to catch. "The veil is thin here," Luke told Maya one afternoon, as she watched him mix a shade of gray that looked exactly like the October sky. "Especially now. At the end of October, this place it breathes. The dead and the living share the same air for a little while. Your aunt understood that. She didn't just live here, she was a caretaker." The smell intensified, concentrating in Alara's bedroom. It was here, hidden beneath a loose floorboard under the bed, that they found her journals. The pages were filled with a spidery script, detailing not a life, but an observation. Alara wrote of the cemetery's permanent residents, cataloging their movements, their moods. She wrote of a specific spirit, a woman she called the mourner, who was not at rest. The entries grew more frantic as the years went on, culminating in a final, stark sentence written on last year's Halloween. The offering was not enough. She is crossing over. She needs a vessel. The revelation came on October 30th. A storm rolled in, and the wind howled around the corner of the building, sounding like a chorus of distant screams. The jack-o'-lanterns lining the streets below, their candles flickering bravely, cast dancing, monstrous shadows on the apartment walls. Maya, unable to sleep, was drawn to the window. The cemetery was a sea of fog, the tombstones looking like islands in a milky void. And there, standing at the iron gates, was the woman from her dreams, from the reflection. She was clearer now. Her dress was black, her face a mask of profound sorrow, and in her hands she held a single, rotting pumpkin. As Maya watched, frozen, the woman's head turned slowly, and her hollow gaze fixed directly on the apartment window. She raised a pale hand and pointed, not at Maya, but past her into the room. Into Rowan, who had just entered, drawn by her sister's sharp intake of breath. The boundaries shattered then. A coldness seeped into the apartment, a damp that had nothing to do with the weather. Whispers coiled through the rooms, just at the edge of hearing, like the rustle of dried cornstalks. The porcelain jack-o'-lantern on the mantel began to weep a thick, sweet-smelling sap. The cardboard cats twitched, their paper tails curling and uncurling. "It's you," Maya whispered, turning to her sister. "She doesn't want me. She wants you." The family secret, painstakingly pieced together from the journals and old letters, was this: Alara was not just their great aunt. Decades ago, her own twin sister, Isolde, had died tragically on Halloween night. Consumed by grief, Alara had dabbled in old rites, Samhain traditions warped by desperation. She had tried to use the thinning veil to pull her sister back, to offer a vessel, a new twin, a blood relative with a face she would recognize. She had failed, but she had tethered Isolde's spirit to the apartment, to the bloodline. Every Halloween, the attempt renewed itself, and Rowan, with her pragmatic soul, her grounded nature, was the perfect, stable vessel for a soul adrift in sorrow. Halloween night arrived. The city outside was a cacophony of joyful fear. Children in costumes, tiny ghosts and superheroes and witches darted through the streets, their laughter echoing up to the apartment. The air was thick with the smell of burning leaves and sugar. But inside the apartment on Rue d'Esmes, the air was still and cold, heavy with the scent of spiritual decay. The climax was not a battle, but a slow, dreadful absorption. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the witching hour, the spectral presence of Isolde grew solid. She stood in the center of the living room, a creature of mist and memory made manifest. The festive orange glow from the street painted her in a hellish light. "Take my hand," Isolde whispered, her voice the sound of dead leaves scraping over stone. Rowan, usually so strong, was paralyzed, her will sapped by the ancient magic of the night and the direct, desperate focus of the ghost. But Maya, fueled by a lifetime of shared existence, of being the weaker one protected by the stronger, threw herself between them. "You can't have her," she screamed, her voice cracking. Isolde's sorrowful face twisted into a mask of rage. The connection was not just to a bloodline, but to twinship itself. The bond was the doorway. The ghost needed a twin, but any twin would do. The entity surged forward, not as a shape, but as a wave of absolute cold and that overpowering, sweet stench of grief. It bypassed Rowan entirely and flowed into Maya. Maya's back arched. Her eyes, the same shade of hazel as her sister S, filmed over, turning the milky gray of a tombstone. She gasped, and the sound was not her own. It was the sigh of a woman dead for half a century. When she looked at Rowan, there was no recognition, only a bottomless, familiar sorrow. Rowan stumbled back, her mind fracturing under the weight of the impossible. Her sister was gone, replaced by this echo, this thing wearing her skin. And then the regression began. It did not happen all at once. In the days that followed, the doctors called it catatonia, a severe psychotic break brought on by grief and stress. But Rowan knew it was something else. It was a retreat. The horror of that Halloween night, the sight of her other half being hollowed out and occupied, was a poison her psyche could not metabolize. She sits now, in a quiet room in a different place, looking out a window at a garden. The world outside has moved on from Halloween. The pumpkins have rotted, the leaves have fallen, The first snow dusts the ground. But in Rowan's mind, it is always October. The boundaries have dissolved completely. She is a child again, trick-or-treating with Maya. She can feel the cheap polyester of her princess costume, smell the waxy smoke from the jack-o'-lanterns on every porch. She can taste the candy corn, the sharp, sugary burst of it. Maya is holding her hand, their identical faces smiling behind plastic masks. The world is simple. The monsters are pretend. The night is full of magic, not terror. Sometimes a caretaker will try to bring her back, speaking her name, showing her a photograph. Rowan might look up, her eyes vague and unfocused. For a fleeting second, a sliver of the present might intrude. The sterile smell of the room, the face of a stranger. But it is too bright, too sharp, too painful. It is a language she no longer understands. So she lets it go. She lets the memory pull her under again, back to the crunch of leaves underfoot, back to the safe, warm pressure of her sister's hand in hers, back to the orange glow of a perfect, endless Halloween night, just before the darkening, just before the smell, just before everything was torn away. She is not here, in this room, in this year. She is there, in the autumn twilight, with her other half, forever walking toward a door that has not yet opened, into a house where no ghost waits. Her mind has found its final, safe costume, and she will never, ever take it off. The garden outside her window is a study in muted browns and grays, a landscape of sticks and hard, frozen earth. A sparrow lands on the barren branch of a rose bush, its feathers fluffed against the cold. Rowan watches it, but she does not see a bird in winter. She sees a black paper bat, cut from construction paper, and taped to a classroom window, silhouetted against a bright orange sunset. The door to her room opens. A woman in soft-soled shoes brings in a tray. Her name is Anya, and her voice is a gentle, persistent hum that Rowan usually tunes out like distant traffic. But today, a word snags. And the city is putting up the Christmas lights downtown, Anya says, setting the tray down. All red and green and gold. It is quite beautiful. The words are wrong. They are jagged stones thrown into the calm, amber pool of her memory. Christmas lights do not belong in October. A flicker of confusion, a spike of anxiety. The princess costume she is wearing in her mind feels suddenly thin, the plastic mask stifling. She looks at the tray. There is a bowl of oatmeal, a slice of toast. But for a single, terrifying moment, she sees something else. A bowl of candy, the brightly wrapped kinds they used to get. The toast is a sugar cookie, iced like a pumpkin. No, Rowan whispers, her voice raspy from disuse. Anya turns, her face a mask of careful optimism. No oatmeal. That's all right. We can try something else. Rowan shakes her head, not at the woman, but at the intrusion. The cookie wavers, and the toast reasserts itself. The Christmas lights threatening to shatter the perpetual twilight of her mind recede. The panic subsides, leaving a cold sweat on her skin. It is a reminder of how fragile this sanctuary is, how hard she must work to maintain the walls. She picks up the spoon. The metal is cool, but in her hand, it is the plastic handle of a trick-or-treat bucket. She eats the oatmeal, and it tastes of cinnamon and sugar, the flavors of a Halloween party. She is safe again. Later, they sit in the common room. A television is on, showing a news segment about a winter storm warning. Rowan stares at the blue and white map, the swirling graphics of snow, and sees only the swirling patterns of a paper marbled ghost she and Maya made in art class. The drone of the meteorologist is the voice of their third-grade teacher, explaining the history of All Hallows' Eve. Another resident, an old man named Henry, sits nearby, humming a tuneless song. The sound grates, a dissonant note in the symphony of her memory. It threatens to pull her back, to make her hear the whispers that coiled through the apartment, the sound of the cardboard cats twitching on the sill. She focuses harder. She concentrates on the feel of the stiff, sparkly dress of her costume, the way it scratched her neck. She remembers the weight of the candy bucket growing heavier with each house. She remembers Maya's laugh, clear and bright, as they ran through a pile of raked leaves. This is the work now. This constant, exhausting curation of the past, editing out the bad ending, looping the happy part. She must be vigilant. Any crack, any chink of present-day reality could let the cold in. It could let the smell in. That sweet, sickly smell of rotten apples and old meat. She will not let that happen. She will stay here in this memory, in this costume. She will hold her sister's hand forever in the safe, orange glow of the porch lights. The real world is the nightmare. This, the fabrication, is her only truth, and she will defend it, silently and completely, until there is nothing left of her but the ghost of a little girl, forever walking home on Halloween night, her pockets full of candy, her heart full of joy, never reaching the door of the apartment on Rue des Messes. The humming from the old man shifted, resolving into a few distinct, wavering notes. It was a Christmas carol, Silent Night. The familiar melody was an assault, a violation of the sacred autumn ere she had so carefully constructed. Rowan flinched, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. The common room's beige walls seemed to pulse, threatening to dissolve into the patterned wallpaper of Alara's hallway. She closed her eyes tightly, squeezing them until spots of color bloomed in the darkness. She focused on the smell, not the sterile, lemon-scented cleaner of this place, but the crisp, smoky aroma of burning leaves. She could almost feel the crunch under her feet, see the way the streetlights cast their long, distorted shadows, turning ordinary hedges into lurking beasts. Maya's hand was warm in hers. They were comparing loot, their breath misting in the chilly air. A new voice cut through her concentration, a man's voice, calm and measured. "Hello, Rowan. My name is Dr. Lefevre." She kept her eyes shut. If she didn't look, he wasn't there. He was just another parent on the street, a shadowy figure on a distant porch. "I've been speaking with your family," he continued. His voice was like a needle trying to pry its way in. They ray very concerned. They mentioned your Aunt S apartment and your sister, Maya. At the sound of her sister S name, spoken in this wrong place, by this wrong voice, the memory flickered. The comforting orange glow of the porch lights dimmed. For a horrifying second, she saw not a friendly neighborhood street, but the grim, iron-wrought gates of Relaxation, wreathed in fog. No, she moaned, shaking her head. She misses you, Rowan, the doctor said softly. She asks about you every day. This was the cruelest trick. Maya was right here. Her hand was right here, clutching a miniature chocolate bar. She could feel the foil wrapper. This man was a liar. He was trying to steal her sister away, to pull her back into the cold, smelly place. Yes, here, Rowan whispered, her voice a dry rustle. There was a pause. She could feel the doctor and Anya exchanging a look over her head. Maya is in Paris, Rowan. She is living in the apartment. She is recovering. Recovering. The word was meaningless. It was a sound that held no shape in her world. Maya didn't need to recover. They were together. They were whole. She felt a touch on her arm. It was Anya's hand, gentle but firm, a touch from the present. It was an anchor trying to drag her up from the depths. The sensation was unbearable, a searing heat against the cool, imagined skin of her memory. Rowan jerked her arm away with a strength that surprised even her. Her eyes flew open. For one blinding, agonizing moment, she saw it all clearly. The bland room, the concerned faces, the winter light through the window, and the truth, the real, monstrous truth, crashed down upon her. Maya was gone. Something else was wearing her face. She was alone. A sound tore from her throat, a raw, guttural cry of loss that was decades in the making. It was the sound the mourner should have made. Then, as quickly as it came, the moment shattered. The pain was too vast. Her mind, her faithful, treacherous mind, slammed the door. The winter light softened, warming to a deep, golden hour orange. The cry in her throat became a giggle. Anya S.'s worried face blurred into the kindly, anonymous face of a neighbor admiring their costumes. The Dr. S. presence was gone, replaced by the scent of a lit pumpkin candle. She looked down at her hand. It was not empty. It was holding Maya S. She could feel the familiar pressure of her twin S fingers laced through her own. "It's getting late," the memory Maya said, her voice exactly as it was. "We should go home." Rowan nodded, a serene smile touching her lips. Home, not the apartment on Rue d'Esmes, but their real home from before. The one with the bright yellow door and the friendly dog next door. "Okay," Rowan said, her voice clear and young. "Let us go." She stood up from the chair, walking past the doctor, and the aide as if they were nothing more than fire hydrants or mailboxes, part of the scenery of her perfect, eternal neighborhood. She walked toward the door of the common room, which in her mind was the gate to their backyard, where they would count their candy on the porch swing. She was back inside the costume, deep within the fantasy, and the walls were thicker than ever. She had faced the real world for a single, searing second, and it had been enough to cement her resolve. She would never make that mistake again. The regression was now a fortress, and she its sole, devoted guardian. The hallway outside the common room was not a hallway. It was a sidewalk, cracked and familiar, lined with glowing jack-o'-lanterns that winked with friendly, candle-lit faces. The linoleum floor was the rough texture of pavement under the thin soles of her princess slippers. Anya S. voice followed her. A distant, muffled call that might have been a mother summoning her children from a few houses down. She reached her room. The door was their back gate, the one that squeaked. She opened it and stepped through into the soft, warm darkness of a late October evening. The sterile room was gone, replaced by the shadowy shapes of their garden. The bed was the porch swing, its metal chains groaning a familiar song as she sat down. She set her plastic bucket of candy beside her with a satisfying thump. From the pocket of her costume, she pulled a single piece of candy, a caramel apple sucker. She unwrapped it slowly, the crinkle of the cellophane a sacred sound. She placed it on her tongue. The taste was overwhelming, a burst of artificial green apple and sweet, sticky sugar. It was the taste of safety. It was the taste of before. This was the ritual, the careful reconstruction of a single, unspoiled hour. Any deviation was dangerous. She had learned that now. The doctor with his kind eyes and his sharp words was a new kind of threat, more insidious than the sudden scent of pine or the sight of snow. He used truth as a weapon. He used Maya's name, but she was stronger now. She knew how to fight back. When the world tried to intrude, she would focus on a sensory detail, a cornerstone of the memory. The taste of this candy, the weight of the cheap plastic crown on her head, the specific ache in her feet from walking so long in dress-up shoes. She swung gently on the porch swing, listening to the crickets. They were the only sound, a steady, rhythmic chirping that drowned out the faint, mechanical beep that sometimes seeped in from the real world. Maya was inside their house, she reasoned, showing their parents the best pieces of candy. She would be out soon. They would sit here together and trade. Maya always gave her the chocolate bars for her root beer barrels. A deep, primal part of her, a part that had screamed in the common room, knew this was a lie. It knew that the Maya inside the house was a phantom, and the real Maya was in Paris, a hollow thing filled with another sorrow. But that part was locked in a basement, its screams muffled by layers of memory and will. The sucker was gone. She crunched the last piece of the hard candy, the sound loud in the quiet of her room. The sweet taste lingered. She looked toward the window. Outside, the real world was a dim, shapeless blur. In here, the night was perfect. The air was cool but not cold. The stars were just beginning to appear, sharp and bright in a velvet sky. She would wait here for Maya. She would wait forever if she had to. because the alternative was a life trapped in a different kind of endless loop, one of sterile rooms and concerned faces, and the gut-wrenching horror of a truth she could not live with. This was the better choice. This was the only choice. She was not Rowan, the broken woman who lost her twin. She was Rowan, the princess, trick-or-treating with her sister, forever on the verge of going home. And as long as she never, ever reached that door, the monster could never get in. The squeak of the back gate was a sound she knew better than her own heartbeat. Rowan turned, her plastic crown slipping a little on her forehead. Maya was coming out, holding 2 cups of cider. The steam rose in gentle curls, visible in the cool evening air. She handed one to Rowan, their fingers brushing. The cup was warm, almost too hot, but the warmth was a comfort. It was real. "Mom says we can stay out for 15 more minutes," Maya said, settling onto the swing beside her. The chains groaned in protest, a familiar, comforting complaint. Rowan nodded, sipping the cider. It was sweet and spicy, with a hint of orange. It tasted exactly as it should. This was right. This was how the memory went. They would drink their cider, trade a few pieces of candy, and then go inside where it was warm. But then Maya spoke again, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you ever think about the lady in the gray house?" The question was a crack in the world, a fissure of pure ice. The lady in the gray house was not part of this memory. She was from a different story, a ghost story they had heard at a sleepover years later. She did not belong on this perfect night. Rowan's grip tightened on the paper cup. The warmth felt suddenly threatening. "No," she said, her voice too sharp. "No, I don't." Maya's face, usually so bright and certain, looked thoughtful, her eyes shadowed. "I do sometimes. I wonder if she was lonely, if she just wanted someone to talk to." The words were wrong. They were Maya's words, in Maya's voice, but the thoughts behind them felt alien, like a splinter of some other, colder reality working its way into their sanctuary. The sweet cider turned cloying in Rowan's mouth. "Stop it," Rowan pleaded, looking at her sister. She searched Maya's hazel eyes for a sign, for the pure, uncomplicated joy that was supposed to be there. For a terrifying instant, she thought she saw a flicker of that bottomless sorrow, the same one she had seen in the apartment. Then Maya blinked, and it was gone. She smiled, a little confused. "Okay, sorry. It was just a thought." She bumped her shoulder against Rowan's. "Hey, I'll give you my Milky Way for your packet of pop rocks." The equilibrium was restored. The crack sealed over. The offer was the correct one, the trade they always made. Relief washed through Rowan, so potent it felt like exhaustion. She handed over the pop rocks, her hand trembling only slightly. She had won. She had pushed the intrusion out. But a new, chilling understanding was settling deep within her, in that locked basement where the screams were kept. The fortress of her mind was not just under attack from the outside. The enemy was inside the walls. The memory of Maya was no longer a passive, perfect recording. It was changing, evolving, becoming a conversation with a ghost she herself was puppeteering. To keep her sister alive, she was giving her a voice, and that voice was beginning to speak of things it should not know. The Milky Way was smooth and familiar on her tongue. She focused on that, the simple act of chewing, of swallowing. The pop rocks were already making Maya giggle, the tiny explosions a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. That was the sound she had to preserve, not the thoughtful, melancholy whisper about lonely women in gray houses. They finished their candy trade in silence. The only sounds the rustle of wrappers and the creak of the swing. The 15 minutes were up. It was time to go inside. This was the most dangerous part of the ritual, the transition from the porch to the house. The doorway had to remain a metaphor, a threshold she never actually crossed. In her mind, their mother was waiting just inside the screen door, holding it open with a smile. "Ready?" Maya asked, standing up and brushing candy crumbs from her pants. Rowan nodded, taking her sister's offered hand. They walked toward the back door of the house. The yellow paint was chipped near the knob, a detail she had added years into the fantasy to make it feel more real. As they reached the top step, Rowan let go of Maya's hand, pretending to adjust the strap of her plastic bucket. "You go first," she said. "I'll be right there." Maya shrugged, a fluid, easy motion. "Okay, don't take forever. The good cartoons are on." She pulled the screen door open and disappeared into the warm, lit interior of the house. Rowan stood on the porch alone. The night was still perfect, the air still crisp. She could hear the faint sound of a television from inside, just as she knew she would. She had done it. She had reached the precipice and stopped. She would not go in. To go in was to end the night, and to end the night was to risk what came after. She sat back down on the swing. She would wait here until the memory reset itself, until she was back at the beginning, walking up the street with a light bucket, the whole glorious evening stretching out before her once more. It was a loop of her own design, a perfect, closed circle. From inside the house, she heard her mother's voice call, "Rowan." "Maya, time to come in and get ready for bed." The voice was warm, loving. It was everything a mother's voice should be. But Rowan stayed on the swing. She heard Maya's answering call, a cheerful coming. Then, a moment later, the back door opened again. Maya stood there, silhouetted against the kitchen light. "Rowan, aren't you coming?" "No," Rowan whispered to the memory. "I like it out here." Maya's silhouette nodded. "Okay, I'll save you some of the popcorn." The door closed, leaving Rowan alone in the comforting darkness. This was the new part of the ritual, the amendment she had made after the first few times the memory had tried to reach its natural conclusion. She would not go inside. She would remain on the porch, in the costume, forever suspended in the moment, just before everything ended. She closed her eyes, listening to the crickets, waiting for the loop to begin again. She was the curator, the architect, and the sole resident of this world. And as long as she never answered the call to come inside, the monster in the apartment, the sorrow in her sister's eyes, and the cold, empty truth of the present could not touch her. She was safe here, on the porch, in the dark, waiting for a morning that would never come. The silence on the porch was a living thing, a blanket woven from cricket songs and distant, muffled laughter from other houses. It was a good silence, a safe one. Rowan let her head fall back against the wooden slats of the swing, the plastic of her crown pressing a familiar, reassuring shape into her skin. She could stay here. She could always stay here. Then a new scent threaded its way through the burning leaves, and the faint, waxy perfume of the jack-o'-lanterns. It was a dry, papery smell, like a forgotten book. It was the smell of her father's study. Her eyes snapped open. This was not part of the memory. Her father was supposed to be in the living room, reading his newspaper. The study was off limits, a place of serious talk and closed doors. The scent grew stronger, carrying with it a ghost of pipe tobacco, a habit he had given up years before. The back door remained closed. The kitchen light was off. The house was dark, too dark. The friendly yellow door seemed to warp, the chipped paint looking more like a deep crack in old, dry wood. The scent of old paper and tobacco was unmistakable now, an anchor dragging her toward a different time, a different grief. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through the warm haze of the fantasy. She gripped the chains of the swing, her knuckles white. She focused on the candy. She still had a Butterfinger. She fumbled for it, the wrapper loud and crinkly in the quiet. She shoved a piece into her mouth, but the chocolate was dust dry, the peanut brittle flavor failing to register. The only thing she could taste was the phantom bitterness of tobacco and the chill of a room she had not entered in 20 years. The memory was breaking. The foundation was giving way. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to rebuild the walls. Burning leaves, crickets, Maya's laugh. But another sound came, faint at first, then growing clearer. It was the slow, rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock that stood in the hall outside her father's study. A clock that had been sold after he died. A sound that had no business on this Halloween night. The porch swing was no longer a porch swing. It was a hard, unforgiving surface. The night air lost its crispness, becoming still and stale. She was losing. The Dr.'s words had been a seed, and now it was sprouting, its roots cracking the very bedrock of her sanctuary. She felt a pressure building behind her eyes, a headache from the strain of holding two worlds apart. The taste of the Butterfinger was now a gritty paste in her mouth, and for a horrifying second, it wasn't chocolate at all, but the chalky, medicinal taste of the pills they tried to give her in this place. No, she whimpered, pressing the heels of her hands against her closed eyes. It's Halloween. It's Halloween. She chanted it like a prayer, a desperate incantation against the invading past. But the tick-tock of the clock was louder now, a metronome counting down to a moment she had spent a lifetime avoiding. The monster wasn't in the apartment on Rue Desmes. The monster was here, in the smell of a forgotten room and the sound of a clock that had stopped long ago, and it was finally finding its way in. The clock as ticking was inside her head now, a hammer against the fragile bone of her skull. The porch swing melted away, the chains dissolving into the cold metal arms of a chair. The warm darkness was ripped aside, replaced by the flat, fluorescent glare of a ceiling light. She was back in the common room. The doctor was there, his face not kind, but grimly determined. An aide stood behind him, holding a small paper cup. The scent of old books and pipe tobacco was so strong she could almost see it, a gray haze in the air. It was the smell of the day they had come home from the funeral, the day the silence had first fallen over their house and never really left. "You're fighting it, Rowan," the doctor said, his voice low and steady. "That's good, fight it. Stay here with us." But she didn't want to be here. Here was the memory after the memory, the hollowed-out world where her father was gone, and the light had gone out of her mother's eyes. It was the beginning of the long, slow drift that had ended with her and Maya in that Parisian apartment, trying to outrun a ghost. She tried to claw her way back to the porch, to the candy and the crickets, but the ticking was an anchor chain pulling her down. She saw her father's study, the door ajar. She saw the thin sliver of darkness within. She had never gone in, not after. No one had. It had remained a shrine, a tomb for a life interrupted. The memory Maya was gone. There was no one to hold her hand. She was 10 years old again, standing in the hallway of a house that was too quiet, staring at that sliver of darkness. The tick-tock was a command. A dry sob escaped her. She was losing the fortress, not to the present, but to a past that was even more terrible. The present offered a clean, sharp pain. Maya was gone. The past offered this, the slow, suffocating decay of a family. "Rowan," the doctor urged. "Breathe, look at me." But she was looking at the door. In her mind, she took a step forward. The floorboard creaked under her foot, the exact same sound it had made all those years ago. The scent of pipe tobacco was a welcoming embrace, a siren's call into the depths. She took another step. The common room, the doctor, the aide, they were all fading, becoming the blurred, indistinct shapes of the hallway. The only thing real was the door to the study. The monster wasn't a thing wearing her sister's face. It was this door. It was the grief she had never faced. Her hand, small and pale, reached for the doorknob. It was cold. This was it, the final boundary. If she crossed this, there would be no going back to the Halloween night. The fantasy would be broken for good, shattered by a truth even more foundational than the loss of her twin. She turned the knob. The ticking stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the sound from the world. She pushed. The door swung open. The room was exactly as he had left it. A layer of dust shimmered in the slanted light from the hall, covering the mahogany desk, the green blotter, the framed photo of their family at the beach. His reading glasses lay folded next to a half-finished crossword. It was a fossil, a moment trapped in amber. The air was thick and still, heavy with the ghost of him. She stood on the threshold, a 10-year-old girl in a princess costume, unable to enter. This was where the memory had always stopped. This was the edge of the world, but the Doctor's voice was a faint, distant thread pulling her forward. "What do you see, Rowan?" She took a single, shuddering step into the room. The floor felt different here, more solid. Her costume seemed to dissolve, the plastic crown evaporating from her head. She was just herself, barefoot on the cold hardwood. Her eyes fell on the chair. His chair. The brown leather was cracked and worn in the shape of him. And in that moment, the memory did not play out like a film. It crashed over her, not as a story, but as a physical sensation. The crushing weight of the silence in the car on the way home from the hospital. The way her mother's hand had felt, cold and limp in hers. Maya, sobbing into her pillow that night, a raw, animal sound Rowan had never heard before. She had built the Halloween memory not just to escape Paris, but to escape this. The Halloween before he died was the last perfect night. By clinging to it, she had built a dam against this flood. Another step. She was standing by his desk. Her fingers, trembling, brushed the dust from the family photo. They were all smiling, squinting in the sun. Her father had his arms around both her and Maya, his smile wide and easy. A sound tore from her, a ragged, broken thing that was part sob, part scream. It was the sound of the lock on the basement door breaking. The grief was not a monster to be fought. It was a room, and she was finally inside it. The study walls wavered, the dust motes dancing violently. The common room bled back in at the edges, the fluorescent light harsh and real. The doctor was kneeling in front of her, his hand on her arm. The paper cup of water was in his other hand. She was on the floor. She didn't remember falling. The taste of the candy was gone, replaced by the salt of her own tears. The weight of the plastic crown was gone, replaced by a heavier, invisible weight. "She's gone," Rowan whispered, the words scraping her throat. It was not about Maya. Not yet. This was a different loss, an older one. "He's gone." The doctor didn't say anything. He just waited. She looked past him, toward the window of the common room. It was dark outside, a real darkness, not the curated velvet of her fantasy. There were no crickets. There was only the hum of the building and the distant, lonely sound of a siren. The porch was gone. The loop was broken. She had opened the door, and the monster had been waiting. But the monster was just the truth, and it had been there all along. She was Rowan, the woman who had lost her father. And then, years later, in a way she still could not fully grasp, her sister too. She was in a room on a floor, and for the first time in a very long time, she was completely, terribly here. The silence in the common room was different now. It was not the safe, curated silence of the porch, but a thin, brittle quiet, holding the echo of her own ragged breath. The doctor's hand on her arm was a point of contact with a world she had been fleeing for months. It felt alien, but solid. "He has gone," she said again, testing the words. They were no longer a secret kept in a locked room inside her. They were out in the open, simple and devastating. The world did not end. The fluorescent lights did not flicker. The aide by the door did not vanish. The foundation of this reality held. She allowed the doctor to help her into a chair. Her body felt heavy, used up. The frantic energy that had sustained the endless Halloween loop was gone, leaving a profound exhaustion in its place. She looked at her hands, resting in her lap. They were the hands of a 40-year-old woman, not a 10-year-old girl. "Maya," she said, and this time the name was a question, a plea for a different story. The doctor's expression was carefully neutral. "We can talk about Maya when you're ready," but a new memory was already surfacing, not as a full sensory assault, but as a clear, cold fact. The Paris apartment, the argument. It had been about money, about the aimlessness of their grief-stricken exile. It had been sharp and ugly, words thrown like knives. Maya had cried, "I can do this anymore, Rowan. I can live in your shadow, living this same day over and over." And Rowan had shouted back, "Then go, just go." And she had. Maya had grabbed her coat and walked out into the Parisian twilight. She had not taken her purse, her phone. She had just left. The police had called it a probable suicide, swept away by the current of the Seine. There was no body, only a single shoe found on the embankment days later. But Rowan had never believed it. She had built the Halloween memory as a shrine, yes, but also as a trap. If she could just keep Maya there, on that porch, then she couldn't have walked into the river. It was a logical flaw her mind had been willing to accept. Now, sitting in the hard plastic chair, the logic was inescapable. Maya was gone. Not as a ghost in a story, not as a phantom in an apartment, but as a fact. The loss was a physical void, a hollowed-out space in her chest that the fantasy could no longer fill. "She left," Rowan whispered, the truth settling into her bones. "I told her to go, and she left." The doctor nodded slowly. "Acknowledging that is the first step, Rowan. Not to blame, but to understand. The grief for her father and the grief for her sister began to braid together inside her. A single, heavy rope of sorrow. There were no more doors to hide behind. The monsters were all named, and they were all just different faces of loss." She looked toward the window again. The darkness outside was no longer a threat. It was just the night. It was the same night that existed over Paris, over her childhood home, over this quiet room. It was the world she had been hiding from. "I am tired," she said. And it was the truest thing she had said in years. "I know," the doctor replied. "Rest now. We'll talk more tomorrow," as the aide led her back to her room. Rowan did not look back for the porch swing or the taste of cider. She walked down the sterile hallway, her footsteps echoing in the new, quiet reality. The loop was broken. The path forward was shrouded in pain, but for the first time, it was a real path. She was not a princess in a crown or a curator of a perfect past. She was just Rowan alone, and the long night was finally beginning to end. The morning light through the window of her room was a pale, watery gray. It fell across the plain wool blanket, the scuffed linoleum floor. It was an ordinary light for an ordinary day. There were no jack-o'-lanterns to be extinguished, no candy wrappers to clean up. Just the faint smell of disinfectant and the distant clatter of a breakfast cart. A different aide, a woman with a calm face, brought her a tray. Oatmeal, a banana, a small carton of milk. The food was bland, textureless. She ate it slowly, each spoonful a conscious act. This was what it was to be here, to be now. Later, the doctor came. He sat in the chair by the door, while she remained on the edge of the bed. The Halloween memory, she began, her voice hoarse from disuse and the tears of the night before. It was the last time we were all together, before the accident. The doctor nodded. A foundation memory. We often return to those in times of extreme stress. It wasn't just about my father, she said, the realization forming as she spoke. It was about her too. In that memory, Maya is still Maya. She's not the sad, haunted woman she became. She's just my sister. We were a team. And in Paris, the doctor prompted gently, we weren't a team anymore. We were two ghosts haunting the same space. I held on too tight. I tried to make her live in my grief, in my version of the past. She looked down at her hands. I think I knew she was drowning. I just didn't want to be the one left alone on the shore. The words hung in the air, stark and simple. There was no monster, no supernatural horror. Only the terrible human geometry of loss and fear. That's why the loop had to break, the doctor said. You were keeping her prisoner to keep yourself company. A single, hot tear traced a path down her cheek. It felt different from the frantic, helpless crying of the night before. This was a quiet, cleansing ache. Yes, the session ended. The day stretched before her, vast and unstructured. There was no script, no predetermined path to follow. The emptiness was terrifying. She walked to the common room window and looked out at the small, fenced courtyard below. A few leaves, brown and brittle, skittered across the patchy grass. It was a bleak landscape, but it was real. The cold glass of the window against her forehead was real. The sound of another patient quietly weeping in a nearby room was real. This was the world she had been avoiding. It was not a perfect circle. It was a straight line, stretching forward into an unknown future. A future where she would have to learn how to be just Rowan, without the princess crown, without her other half. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the sterile, recycled air. It was a start. The memory of the porch was still there, a warm, distant ember in her mind. But it was no longer a fortress. It was just a memory. And for now, That was enough. The days that followed were measured in small, tangible things. The weight of a book in her hands, the taste of lukewarm tea, the slow, steady rhythm of her own breathing during the mandated quiet time. She did not try to force herself to feel anything. She simply existed within the four walls of her room and the scheduled confines of her days. Sometimes the ghost of the porch swing would beckon. The urge to slip back into that warm, perpetual autumn was a physical pull, a seductive whisper in her ear. But she had seen the machinery behind the curtain. She had opened the door to the study. Now, when the pull came, she would press her palm flat against the cool wall of her room, or focus on the sound of a real voice from the hallway, anchoring herself in the unyielding present. She began to talk about Maya in her sessions, not as the perfect twin from the Halloween memory, but as the complex, flawed woman she had been. She spoke of Maya S.'s restlessness, her resentment, her own unique grief that had been so different from Rowan S. She admitted the petty jealousies, the silences that had stretched for days in that Paris apartment, the way they had used their shared tragedy as both a shield and a weapon against each other. One afternoon, she asked for a pencil and paper. The aide brought her a standard issue notebook and a dull number 2 pencil. She sat at the small desk in her room, the blank page staring back at her. She did not try to write a story. Instead, she began to draw. A clumsy, childlike sketch of a house. Their house. She drew the friendly yellow door, but this time she included the crack in the wood, not as a monstrous fissure, but as a simple fact of its age. She drew the porch swing empty. She drew 2 figures standing side by side on the lawn, their hands not clasped, but hanging at their sides. It was not a happy picture. It was a true one. The doctor looked at it during their next session. "This is different," he observed. "It's just the house," she said. "It's just how it was." He nodded, yes. A week later, a letter arrived. It was from her mother, the first piece of mail she had accepted since her admission. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was short, filled with mundane news about the garden and a neighbor's new dog. At the end, her mother had written, "I miss you, Rowan. I miss you both. Come home when you're ready." She read the words again and again. "I miss you both." It was an acknowledgement of the double loss, a shared burden. Her mother was not in the Halloween memory. Her mother was here, in the present, in a house that was likely too quiet, waiting. That night, for the first time, Rowan did not dream of the porch, or the Parisian apartment, or her father's study. She dreamed she was walking down a long, unfamiliar road. It was not a scary road. It was just a road, lined with bare trees, stretching toward a horizon she could not see. She was alone, and she was walking. When she woke, the emptiness was still there, but it felt less like a prison and more like a space waiting to be filled. She got out of bed and walked to the window. The sun was just rising, casting a weak, pink-gold light over the courtyard. It was going to be a cold day. She could feel it. She wrapped her arms around herself and watched the light grow stronger. The loop was broken. The story was over. Now, There was only the slow, uncertain work of morning. Story 2. The wind began it. A low susurrus through the drying cornfields that surrounded our town like a rustling yellow sea. It wasn't a violent wind, not at first. It was a whispering wind, one that slipped under the eaves of old houses and through the cracks in window frames, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and decay, of cold earth and the sweet, cloying rot of pumpkins from the patch out on Old Mill Road. It was a wind that seemed to speak, if you listened too long in the silence of an October twilight, not in words, but in impressions, a psychic rustle of things turning, of pages in a book too large and too old to comprehend. It spoke of endings and of beginnings that were far worse. My name is Arthur Llewellyn, and I am, or was, a scholar of folklore. I came to the town of Harvest End because of the wind, or rather, because of what I heard in it, transcribed in a dozen crumbling journals from my predecessors at the university. They called it the sighing season, this particular quality of the autumn wind that seemed concentrated here, in this forgotten corner of New England. They wrote of its effect on the psyche, a gentle, persistent unraveling that peaked in the days leading to Halloween. I came as a skeptic, a man of reason, to document the local superstitions, to write a paper that would politely debunk the whole affair. I rented the old gable house on the edge of town, a Victorian pile of gingerbread trim and shadowed gables, and I unpacked my books and my tape recorder, ready to dissect a myth. The town itself was a picture of Halloween perfection, a postcard of autumnal splendor. Every porch bore a grinning, leering, or winking jack-o'-lantern, their candlelit souls casting a restless, dancing glow as dusk fell early, by 5 o'clock. The trees were bare skeletons, their branches clawing at a sky the color of a day-old bruise. Leaves of crimson and burnt umber carpeted the streets, and they did not simply lie there, they skittered and chased, as if herded by an unseen intelligence. The air was thick with the smells of the seasoned cinnamon from apple cider, the waxy perfume of melting candle stubs, and beneath it all, that faint, sweet smell of decay. Children, sheathed in plastic and polyester as monsters and heroes, already practiced their roots, their laughter sometimes a bright, joyous sound, and other times, when the wind caught it just right, a distorted, gabbling echo. My first encounter with the blurred reality of Harvest End came 3 days before Halloween. I was in the town's small, dusty library, housed in what was once a church. I was looking for records, for any local lore about the founding, about the name of the town itself. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Higgins, with skin like crumpled tissue paper, and eyes that held a perpetual, watery chill, watched me from her desk. "Looking for the sighing season, are you?" she asked, her voice the dry rustle of corn husks. She hadn't asked my purpose, she simply knew. "I am studying local atmospheric phenomena," I said, a little too defensively. She smiled, a thin, bloodless line. "We have a lot of phenomena here. The best is saved for the 31st. The veil gets so thin you can almost see through it. Some say you can step through, if you know the way. She pointed a bony finger towards a nonfiction section. The town histories are there. Not that they tell you what you really want to know. I found a slim volume bound in peeling leather. It was not a formal history, but a collection of writings from a man named Josiah Pynchon, one of the town's founding fathers. The script was a difficult, spidery hand. Most of it was mundane accounts of harvests and births. But one entry, dated October 31st, 1787, caught my eye. "The reaping wind is upon us again," it read. "It does not blow from any compass point, but from the spaces between. The children wear their faces to please it, and the gourds are carved with sigils to focus its attention. We make our offerings, and we pray the choosing does not fall upon our house. The Lord of the fallow fields hungers, and on this night, the thin night, he may walk among us, wearing the face of our fear. The ritual must hold. The door must be opened, but only a crack, lest he come through entirely, and the world be unmade." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the library's damp. This was not the benign folklore of harvest spirits I had expected. This was something darker, something cosmic and dreadful. I copied the passage, my hand trembling slightly. When I looked up, Mrs. Higgins was watching me, her expression unreadable. "Find what you were looking for, Mr. Llewellyn. Who is the Lord of the fallow fields?" I asked, trying to sound academic. Her eyes glinted. "He has as many names as there are dead leaves on the ground. He is the reason the harvest ends. He is the silence after the laughter. You'll see his work soon enough. It's in the pumpkins, if you know how to look." That night, carving a pumpkin I'd bought from a roadside stand, her words came back to me. The act felt different, heavier. The slick, cold pulp beneath my fingers, the seedy, stringy innards that I scooped out and piled on newspaper. It felt less like preparing a decoration, and more like performing a dissection. The orange flesh bled a thin, clear fluid. I carved a simple, triangular-eyed face. But as I set the candle inside and lit it, the flickering light through the gaps did not create a jolly grin. It looked like a scream. A silent, agonized scream. And for a moment, as the wind moaned around the house, I thought I saw something move in the shifting shadows the jack-o'-lantern threw upon my wall, something too tall and too thin, with limbs that articulated in too many places. I told myself it was the power of suggestion, the fatigue of research. I was a rational man, but the seed was planted, and the soil of harvest's end was fertile indeed. The next day, the 29th, the town's Halloween fervor intensified. Houses were draped in synthetic cobwebs that looked, in the gray afternoon light, disconcertingly authentic. Plastic skeletons hung from porches, and I found myself avoiding their empty gaze, a primitive part of my brain insisting that one of them, just one, had not been there a moment before. I decided to attend the annual haunted hayride, a fundraiser for the volunteer fire department. It was a chance to observe the townspeople en masse to see how they played at fear. The hayride took us through the very cornfields that whispered incessantly. The wagons were pulled by a rumbling tractor, and we jostled along in the deep, premature dark. Teenagers in rubber masks leaped from the corn, brandishing chainsaws with the chains removed. People screamed and laughed. It was all wonderfully, commercially spooky. Until at Wasson T, we rounded a bend and the scene changed. There was no teenager here. A figure stood between the corn rows, a scarecrow, but unlike any I had seen. Its body was made of knotted, dark wood like old grapevines, and its head was a lumpy, misshapen gourd carved not with a face, but with a complex, spiraling symbol that hurt the eyes to look at. It did not jump out. It simply stood, and as our wagon passed, its head, I swear, turned slowly to follow us. A cold deeper than the October air settled in my bones. No one else seemed to notice. They were still laughing at the last fake zombie. Then a whisper, so clear it might have been spoken directly into my ear, cutting through the chatter and the tractor's roar. It was a single word, carried on that sighing wind. Soon, I left the hayride early, walking the long, dark road back to town. The jack-o'-lanterns on every porch now seemed like 1,000 watching eyes. Their grins were no longer playful, but predatory. I felt the weight of the knowledge I was accumulating, the forbidden lore from Pynchon's journal. It was no longer an academic exercise. I was an investigator stumbling into a truth too vast, and I could feel the first, fine strands of my sanity beginning to fray. Halloween Eve. The tension in the town was palpable, a psychic hum beneath the festive preparations. The sky was a lid of low, fast-moving clouds, and a thick, natural fog began to coil up from the river, mingling with the vapors from 100 fog machines until the world became a ghost of itself. Boundaries dissolved. The line between a decorated plastic skeleton and a real one, between a child's costume and the thing it represented, between the fog and the things that might move within it, it all began to blur. I was in the town square, watching parents set up for the next day's party, when I saw him. An old man standing by the war memorial, dressed in a black suit that seemed a century out of date. He was not wearing a costume, yet his face was wrong. It was too long, the skin pulled tight over prominent bones, his mouth a grim, lipless line. He held a carved pumpkin in the crook of his arm, not as a prop, but like a sacred object. Our eyes met across the square, and in that moment the wind died. The chatter of the townspeople faded, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. The old man's head tilted. He didn't smile, but the expression on his face was one of recognition. He was one of them, a cultist, a keeper of the old ways, the terrible ways Pynchon had written about. He walked away, melting into the fog as if he had never been. The sounds of the square rushed back in. I asked a woman hanging orange and black streamers if she knew the man in the black suit. She looked at me, her face blank, then cheerful. "Oh, you must have seen Mr. Absalom. He keeps to himself. Lovely weather for the holiday, isn't it? The normalization of the horror was itself a horror. I was the only one who seemed to see the cracks in the world. That night, the dreams began. Vague, shifting images of a vast, fallow field under an orange, swollen moon. A figure walking there, tall and impossibly thin, its outline shifting like smoke, sometimes a man, sometimes a scarecrow, sometimes a tangle of bare branches. There was a sound, a dry, rustling, clicking sound, like insects or rattling bones, and a voice, not in words, but in a command that was woven into the fabric of the dream itself. Look, see. I awoke on Halloween morning with a start, the taste of copper, and cold soil in my mouth. The house was freezing. My breath plumed in the air. On the floor, leading from my bedroom door to the bed, was a trail of wet, black leaves. They had not been there when I went to sleep. The day was a countdown to an execution. As the hours bled away, the festive atmosphere curdled. The laughter of the costumed children began to sound shrill, desperate. The jack-o'-lantern's grins seemed to widen, their candle eyes staring with a malevolent intelligence. The wind was constant now, a sigh that had become a moan, a lament for the dying year that was also a summoning chant. By 6 o'clock, it was fully dark. The main event had begun. The streets were filled with tiny ghosts and goblins, superheroes and witches, their parents trailing behind them like anxious shadows. I stood on my porch, a bowl of candy in my hands, a participant in the ritual whether I wanted to be or not. The doorbell rang, again and again. Little hands reached into the bowl. Trick or treat. I heard the phrase 100 times, and each time it sounded less like a request and more like a threat. Then a group of children arrived who were different. Their costumes were not store-bought. They were made of rough, homespun cloth, of dried corn husks, and of what looked like old, stained burlap sacks. Their masks were not plastic, but seemed to be carved from dark, polished wood, their features elongated and alien. They did not speak. They simply held out their bags. As I dropped candy into one, my fingers brushed against the bag. It was not made of paper or plastic. It was cold and leathery, and it pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat. I snatched my hand back. The child with the wooden mask tilted its head. From behind the slits of the eyes, there was no child looking out. There was only a deep, velvety blackness, and for a moment, a pinprick of orange light, like a distant star. They turned in unison and walked away, their small, silent forms swallowed by the swirling fog. That was the moment my reason shattered. I knew it was all real. The cult, the lord of the fallow fields, the thinning veil. The offering was not the candy. The offering was the night itself, the permission granted by tradition, the open doors, the invitation to the strange and the uncanny. We were not celebrating. We were performing a sacrament for a god of emptiness and decay. I had to see. I had to know. Abandoning my post, I walked into the heart of the town, towards the old cornfield where the real scarecrow stood. The streets were emptying now, the trick-or-treaters retreating indoors, the laughter fading. The only sound was the wind, and beneath it, a new sound, a dry, rustling, clicking sound, the sound from my dreams. I reached the edge of the cornfield. The town was behind me, its lights smeared and haloed in the fog. Before me, the dead corn stood in ragged rows, whispering its secrets. And there, in the center of the field, was the scarecrow. But it was not the inert figure from the hayride. It was moving, its vine-like limbs uncurled. The gored head, with its spiraling sigil, began to glow with a sickly, phosphorescent orange light. The air around it shimmered, like heat haze on a cold day. The veil was not just thin here, it was torn. From the town, I heard a single, piercing scream cut off abruptly. Then another. Not the playful screams of the haunted hayride, but the raw, terminal sound of genuine terror. The orange light from the scarecrow pulsed, and I felt a wave of nausea, of psychic disorientation. The world tilted. The stars in the sky above swirled and rearranged themselves into patterns that defied geometry. The scarecrow was not the god. It was the conduit, the focal point. The door opened just a crack, and through that crack he came. There was no grand, physical form. It was a presence, a wave of absolute negation that washed over the land. It was the concept of fallowness, of the barren field after the harvest, given sentience and hunger. I saw it in the dying of the jack-o'-lantern lights, one by one, as if a great breath had been blown out. I felt it in the sudden, profound cold that killed the very wind. I heard it in the absolute silence that followed the last scream. I saw the townspeople then emerging from their houses. They walked in a trance, their Halloween costumes seeming to fuse with their bodies. The witch-s hat was now a growth of ragged flesh. The superhero-s mask was now the actual skin of the face, stretched and featureless. They walked towards the field, not as victims, but as a congregation. They were the cultists, all of them, had been all along. Their devotion was in their celebration. Their ritual was the holiday itself. Mrs. Higgins was there at the front, her face ecstatic. The man in the black suit, Mr. Absalom, stood beside the glowing scarecrow, his arms raised. They were not being punished. They were being harvested. Their joy, their fear, their very identities donned and shed so easily with their costumes were the crop being reaped. I stood at the edge, a witness, an unsuspecting scholar who had sought hidden knowledge and found only the abyss staring back. The presence knew I was there. It turned its attention to me, not as a gaze, but as an absence that focused on my soul. It showed me the truth. Harvest-s End was not just the name of the town. It was its purpose. A place where the lord of the fallow fields was fed once a year, so that he would not turn his hunger to the wider world. The horror was not an invasion. It was a covenant. And then it was over. The orange light in the scarecrow-s head died. The presence withdrew back through the crack in the world, sated. The townspeople stopped, blinked, and looked around, confused. They laughed, a little nervously, and began to head back to their homes, to their bowls of candy, their normal lives resuming as if a switch had been flipped. The veil had thickened again. The door was closed, but not for me. I had seen behind the curtain, had learned the forbidden truth. I walked back to the gable house, my body moving, my mind a frozen wasteland. The world looked the same, but it wasn't tea. The jack-o'-lanterns were just rotting vegetables. The costumes were just fabric and plastic. But I knew what lay beneath, what waited in the spaces between, what hunger stirred in the heart of the fallow fields. I sit in my study now, writing this down. The wind is gentle again, just a whisper. But I hear the message in it now. I understand the sighing season. It is the sound of the door opening. It is the breath of the Lord of the fallow fields. And I know, with a certainty that has unmoored me from reality, that he is pleased. He is sated. He is waiting. For the ritual must hold. The door must be opened, but only a crack. Only a crack. Only a crack, the words ended. But the hum in the air did not. It was a low, subaudible thrum that vibrated in the fillings of my teeth and the bones of my skull. I sat for a long time, the pen loose in my fingers, the pages of my account, a stark white accusation in the lamplight. I was a historian of the unseen, and I had documented the end of my own ignorance. The knowledge was a poison, and it was circulating through me, changing the composition of my soul. A soft knock at the front door made me jump. My heart was a frantic animal against my ribs. No one should be here. The night was over. The harvest was done. I walked to the door, my legs unsteady, and opened it. Mrs. Higgins stood on the porch. She held a small, woven basket covered with a red, checkered cloth. Her watery eyes were calm, devoid of the chilling fervor I had witnessed in the field. She looked like any other kindly old woman making a neighborly visit. "Mr. Llewellyn," she said, her voice still the rustle of corn husks, but now it sounded almost gentle. "I thought you might appreciate some of my apple butter. It from the last of the season harvest." I could only stare, my mind screaming. This was the high priestess of a cosmic horror, offering me preserves. She smiled that thin, bloodless smile. "You look pale, dear. It was a busy night. The children can be so energetic." Her eyes held mine, and in their depths I saw not a threat, but a profound and weary understanding. She knew that I knew. I stammered, the words crumbling in my mouth. "You saw the truth," she finished for me, her tone matter-of-fact. "It is a heavy thing to bear, but it is our truth. It is what keeps the world turning, Mr. Llewellyn. The harvest must end so the field may rest. The Lord must be given his due, lest he take it all." She pushed the basket into my hands. The weight of it was surprising, solid. "This will help. The apples are from the oldest tree in the valley. It has fed generations." I took the basket, my fingers numb. "The children, the ones with the wooden masks. The chosen," she said softly. "They have a special role. They are the vessels through which the invitation is made. They are born to it. They do not fear the fallow fields. They are its first and most tender shoots." She looked past me into the house, her gaze lingering on my desk where my writings lay. "You have been recording it. That is good. It is important that someone remembers, even if they do not understand. She turned to leave, then paused. Do not try to leave, Alistair. The town one tea let you. You have partaken of the season. You have given candy to the chosen. You are part of the ritual now. You belong to Harvest S End. She descended the porch steps and melted into the pre-dawn gloom, leaving me standing in the open doorway, holding a basket of apple butter that smelled faintly of cloves and cold, rich earth. I closed the door and locked it, a futile gesture. I placed the basket on the kitchen table and lifted the cloth. The apple butter was a deep, dark red, almost black. It looked like a preserve of old wine and older blood. The smell was intoxicating, a perfect, spiced sweetness that made my mouth water even as my stomach clenched. I was starving. I had not eaten since the previous morning. The rational part of my brain, the part that was now a tiny, shivering thing in a corner of my skull, warned me not to touch it. But a deeper, more instinctual part knew it was pointless to resist. This, too, was part of the offering. This was the communion. I took a spoon from the drawer, dipped it into the dark, thick concoction, and brought it to my lips. The flavor was immense. It was the taste of ripe apples, yes, but also of wood smoke, of decaying leaves, of the first frost. It was the essence of the sighing season condensed into a single spoonful. A profound calm settled over me. The jagged edges of my terror were smoothed away. The screaming in my mind quieted to a whisper. I understood now. The horror was not something to be fought or escaped. It was a cycle, as natural and as terrible as the turning of the earth. My fear was just another crop, and it had been reaped. I was fallow now, empty, at peace. I sit now in the quiet of the morning. The town is still. In the distance, a dog barks and a car engine turns over. Life goes on. I look out the window at the gardens, now stripped and brown. I see the beauty in the barrenness. I feel the rightness of the silence. The gable house no longer feels like a temporary rental. It feels like a home. My home. I will unpack my books properly. I will air out the rooms. There is much to do before the first snow. And next autumn, when the wind begins to sigh through the valley, I will be ready. I will help with the preparations. I will carve a pumpkin with the old sigils. I will hand out candy to the silent children with the leathery bags. For the ritual must hold. The door must be opened, but only a crack. Only a crack. The days that followed were unnervingly serene. The frantic energy of Halloween had bled away, leaving the town of Harvest S End in a state of quiet, post-coital languor. The jack-o'-lanterns slumped on porches, their grins collapsing inwards, their candle-lit menace replaced by the bland decay of ordinary vegetables. People nodded to me on the street, their smiles no longer seeming like masks, but like the genuine, placid expressions of those who share a profound and unspoken burden. I nodded back. I was one of them now. I began my new routines. I visited the town S small library, not to research the esoteric, read the local paper and chat with the librarian, a Mr. Davison, who had a fondness for chess, and never once mentioned the strange traditions of his home. We played every Tuesday afternoon. His moves were patient, strategic, as if he were accustomed to games that spanned generations. I ate the apple butter. Every morning, I spread it on my toast. Each bite was a reaffirmation, a quiet communion with the soil and the silence. The frantic historian who had arrived here was a fading memory, a character from a book I had once read. My own writings, that frantic account of the night, I sealed in an envelope and placed in a drawer. It was not a warning to be sent. It was a record for the archive, for the next one who might need to know. One afternoon in late November, with a hard frost silvering the lawns, Mrs. Higgins appeared again at my door. She did not bring a basket. She wore a heavy wool coat and carried a small, leather-bound book. Alistair, she said, using my first name as a matter of course. I thought you might be ready for this. She handed me the book. It was a ledger, its pages filled with tight, spidery script dates, names, weather patterns, crop yields. It was a history of Harvest S. End, but not the one in the official records. This was a log of the sighing season. It documented the strength of the presents each year, the quality of the offering, the number of chosen children who had walked the streets. We keep track, she said simply. It is important to monitor the health of the covenant. This year was robust. Your presence, your fear, added a certain piquancy. The Lord was very pleased. I took the book, its leather cold and supple in my hands. It felt like holding a living piece of the town-s heart. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Winter is coming, she said, looking up at the gray sky. A time of rest, for us and for him. But the work continues. There is always preparation. We will speak again in the spring, when the sap begins to rise. After she left, I sat with the ledger. I read of droughts and floods, of years when the veil was so thin other things, lesser things, slipped through and had to be dealt with. I read of strangers who had stumbled upon the truth and had to be folded into the community, a phrase that now carried a deep and chilling resonance. I was not the first outsider to learn the secret. I was simply the latest to be assimilated. That night, I dreamed again of the fallow field, but the dream was different. The sky was not an angry orange, but a calm, deep indigo. The scarecrow was still, a silent sentinel. The tall, thin figure was there, but it was not a thing of terror. It was a keeper, a watchman. It turned its head of shifting smoke and branches towards me, and I felt not fear, but a sense of belonging. I was part of the landscape now. My sanity had not been shattered. It had been pruned, cut back for the winter, so it could grow again in a new, more accommodating shape. I awoke feeling more rested than I had in years. The hum was still there, beneath everything, but I no longer fought it. I listened to it, the way one listens to the sound of their own blood. It was the sound of the world, the true world, turning on its axis. Today, I will walk to the edge of the cornfield. The dead stalks click and whisper in the wind, a dry, soothing rhythm. I will stand there and look at the scarecrow, its form stark against the gray sky. I will acknowledge it and the power it channels. I will feel the profound, empty peace of the fallow field, and I will know my place in it. The ritual must hold. The door must be opened, but only a crack. I understand my role now. I am not a victim. I am a custodian, a keeper of the quiet, a steward of the sighing season. And I am content. The snow came early, a thick, silent blanket that smothered the last of the autumn's color and sound. The world became a study in monochrome, the white of the fields meeting the gray of the sky, and the town of Harvest's End retreated into a deep and genuine hibernation. My days took on a slow, measured pace. I read the ledger from cover to cover, learning the rhythms of this sacred duty. I tended the fire in the gable house's hearth. The crackling logs a small, domestic echo of the greater, colder fire that slept beneath the earth. In February, the coldest month, Mr. Absalom paid me a visit. He arrived without ceremony, stamping snow from his boots on my porch. He did not wear the black suit, but heavy work clothes and a thick coat. He accepted a cup of coffee and sat in my study, his eyes scanning my shelves with a quiet approval. The work of preservation is vital, he said, his voice a low rumble. You have adapted well, Alistair, better than most. It felt less like adaptation, I replied, and more like remembering something I had always known. He nodded, a slow, grave dip of his head. That is often the way. The truth was already inside you. The season merely brought it to the surface. He finished his coffee and stood. The planting will begin soon after the thaw. The symbols must be carved into the soil at the field's edge. You will join us. It was not a question. It was an assignment. I felt a flicker of something not dread, but anticipation. I will, I said. When the thaw did come, it was a slow, dripping revelation. The snow receded, revealing the mud and the matted brown grass. The air still held a bite, but there was a wet, fertile smell beneath it. On a cool, cloudy morning, I walked with Mrs. Higgins, Mr. Absalom, and a few other townspeople I now recognized as the inner circle of the taciturn congregation, to the edge of the old cornfield. We carried no modern tools, only simple, curved knives of dark flint. We worked in silence, kneeling in the cold mud. Following Mrs. Higgins's lead, I carved the same spiraling sigil I had seen on the scarecrow's head into the earth. The action was meditative. The cold mud numbed my fingers, but the work felt right. It was a promise, a preparation of the soil not for corn, but for the ritual to come. We were planting the idea of the harvest, the intention of the offering. As I carved, I felt a connection to the land that was deeper than ownership or residence. It was a symbiotic bond. The town fed the land with its devotion, and the land, in turn, protected the town, focusing a cosmic hunger that would otherwise be indiscriminate. We were gardeners of a terrible and necessary truth. Spring turned to summer. The days grew long and warm, town blossomed with ordinary life picnics, a summer festival, children playing in the streets. I participated in it all, but with a new perspective. I saw the vibrant, bustling summer not as the opposite of the sighing season, but as its necessary counterpart. The abundance was what made the subsequent emptiness so potent. The joy was what made the fear so nourishing. I began to notice the children. Not all of them, but a few. Their eyes were a little too calm, their movements a little too synchronized. They were the chosen, the vessels, growing up in plain sight, waiting for their night. I would see one, a girl of perhaps 7, staring at the old cornfield with a look of serene recognition. I would nod to her, and she would nod back, a silent understanding passing between us. Now, as August wanes, the first change is upon us. The light has taken on a golden, slanted quality. The wind, for the first time since last autumn, has found its voice again. It is not yet a sigh, but a whisper, a rustle of anticipation in the leaves. I am in my study. The ledger is open on my desk, next to my own sealed account. I have added a new entry in my own hand. I feel a profound sense of calm, of readiness. The gable house is no longer just my home, it is my post. The sighing season is returning. The veil is beginning to thin. I can feel it like a pressure in the air, a familiar static on the edge of my senses. Soon, the pumpkins will be carved, the costumes will be chosen, and the children will walk the streets. I will be waiting for them. I have a special bowl of candy ready by the door, and I know that when the chosen ones approach, with their silent wooden masks and their leathery, pulsing bags, I will not feel fear. I will feel a deep and solemn gratitude. I will drop the candy into the offering, my fingers brushing against the living leather, and I will welcome the quiet, the emptiness, the fallow peace. For the ritual must hold. The door must be opened, but only a crack, only a crack. The first true sigh of the wind came last night, a long, low exhalation that slid down the chimney and made the fire gutter. I looked up from my book, not with alarm, but with a quiet acknowledgement. It is time. The town knows it too. I saw old man Davison at the general store today, buying twice his usual amount of salt and nails, his eyes meeting mine with a look of grim preparation. We did not speak of it. There is no need. This morning, I went into the attic of the gable house. It was a place I had avoided, a repository for the detritus of previous tenants. Dust motes danced in the slants of light, piercing the gloom. In a corner, under a faded sheet, I found it. A wooden mask. It was old, the wood dark and smooth with age, carved into a face that was neither human nor animal, its expression one of serene vacancy. It was not a mask to be worn for fun. It was a tool, a part of the town's sacred inventory, left here for the keeper of this house. I brought it downstairs and placed it on the mantelpiece. It belongs there. It watches over the room with its blank eyes, a reminder of the quiet truth that underpins our lives. The children have begun their preparations. I see them in small groups, their games changing. They are practicing their walk, a slow, synchronized pace that is unnerving in its precision. They do not laugh or shout during these games. They are rehearsing. Their parents watch from porches, their faces not filled with pride or worry, but with a kind of solemn acceptance. This is their purpose. This is their heritage. I have carved my pumpkin. I used the flint knife from the spring planting, and I carved the same spiral sigil. It sits on my porch now, a hollowed-out sentinel. When I lit the candle inside it last evening, the light that shone through the carving was not warm, but a cold, pale orange that seemed to push back the night rather than illuminate it. Mrs. Higgins visited this afternoon. She saw the mask on my mantle and gave a slow, approving nod. She saw the pumpkin and ran a gnarled finger over the carved symbol. "It is a strong marking," she said. "The Lord will see it clearly. He will know this house is a faithful one. I am ready," I told her, and the words were true. "We are all ready," she replied. "The offering is prepared. The chosen are focused. The veil is thin as parchment. Tomorrow night, the door will open, just a crack. Tomorrow is Halloween. The air is thick with promise. The sighing wind is a constant now, a melody that plays just at the edge of hearing. I feel no fear, only a profound and settling stillness. I have my role to play. I am the keeper of the gable house, the recorder of the season, the one who hands the candy to the chosen and helps usher in the fallow piece. I will go to bed early tonight. I will need my rest for the long night ahead. As I write this, the wind is sighing around the eaves, a lullaby for the faithful. It is the sound of a world breathing in, holding it, and waiting to breathe out again into silence. For the ritual must hold. The door must be opened, but only a crack. Only a crack. The night arrived not with a bang, but with a deepening of the silence that the sighing wind had carved out of the world. I stood inside my door, the bowl of candy in my hands. The street was empty, bathed in the cold, unnatural light from the jack-o'-lanterns. Then they emerged from the shadows between the houses. The chosen children. They moved as one, a slow, flowing procession in their simple, dark clothing. Their wooden masks were identical, their serene vacancy more chilling than any monster's grimace. The leather bags they carried seemed to pulse with a slow, patient rhythm, like a sleeping heart. They began their rounds, stopping at each house that displayed the sigil. No words were exchanged. The doors opened, candy was dropped into the waiting bags, and the doors closed. A silent, sacred transaction. Then they were on my walk, 3 of them. Their synchronized steps were soundless on the path. They stopped at my porch, their blank masks tilted up at me. I opened the door. The air that entered was cold and carried the scent of turned earth and frost. I looked into the eye holes of the mask of the child in front. There was no child there, not in the way I once understood. There was only a deep, focused emptiness, a vessel waiting to be filled. I took a handful of candy from my bowl and dropped it into the open bag. My fingers brushed against the leather. It was warm and dry, and for a fleeting second, I felt a vast, slumbering attention brush against my mind. Then they turned and moved on to the next house. I closed my door, my hands steady. The transaction was complete. I had given my share. I went to the window and watched the procession continue its work, moving toward the center of town, toward the old cornfield and the scarecrow that was its sentinel. The sighing of the wind grew louder, coalescing into a single, sustained note that was not a sound, but a pressure in the bones of the world. The pale orange light from the pumpkins flickered, then brightened, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to peel away from the objects that made them. The veil was at its thinnest. The door was open. A crack. I felt a pull, a deep, gravitational tug toward the field. I did not resist. I walked out of my house and joined the stream of townspeople moving silently through the streets. We gathered at the edge of the cornfield, a congregation in the dark. The scarecrow was gone. In its place stood the tall, thin figure, no longer a smudge of shadow, but a defined presence of smoke and ancient wood. It was harvesting. From the pulsing bags of the chosen children, it drew out shimmering, gossamer threads of light and color, the fear, the excitement, the wild, untamed energy of the night. It consumed them, and with each thread, its form grew more substantial, more real. I felt no terror, only a awe that was bordering on reverence. This was the truth of it. This was the balance. We gave it the storm of our emotions, and in return, it granted us the profound peace of the void. The figure turned its head. It had no face, only a swirling confluence of darkness and intention. Its gaze swept over us, the faithful, the stewards. It paused on me for a moment, and in that moment, I felt a recognition, an acceptance. Then it was done. The figure dissolved into the night. The sighing wind ceased, and a silence so absolute it was like a physical weight fell over Harvest's End. We stood there for a long time, breathing in the quiet. Then, without a word, we turned and walked back to our homes. The chosen children walked with us, their masks removed, their faces now those of ordinary, sleepy children. The ritual was complete. The offering had been accepted. Back in the gable house, I sat in my chair by the cold fireplace. The frantic energy of Halloween was gone, reaped and gathered. The familiar emptiness settled in its place, a clean, quiet space inside me. I looked at the wooden mask on the mantel. Its serene vacancy no longer seemed strange. It seemed like home. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, gently covering the world in a blanket of white. The sighing season was over. The long, quiet winter had begun, and I was at peace. The snow fell for 3 days, sealing us in. The world was reduced to the soft hiss of flakes against the window and the deep, insulating quiet that followed the harvest. I spent my days reading, tending the fire, and writing in my own ledger. My entries were not as spidery or as dense as the old ones, but they were precise. I noted the quality of the silence, the depth of the snow, the way the hum of the world had settled into a low, almost inaudible drone, like like a bare winter breath. In December, a family new to town, the Millers, tried to string up colorful lights along their roofline. The bulbs would flicker and die within minutes, no matter how many times they were replaced. I watched from my window as the father grew frustrated, his breath pluming in the cold air. He did not understand that the town itself resisted such garish displays. This was a time for monochrome, for reflection, not for false cheer. The next day, the lights were gone, packed away. They were learning. I saw the chosen children often. They were different now, quieter than the others, their eyes holding the memory of the void. They did not build snowmen or have snowball fights with the same frantic energy as their peers. They would simply stand in the falling snow, faces upturned, as if listening to a distant song. I knew the feeling. We shared a bond, we who had stood at the edge of the field and witnessed the harvest. Winter-esque grip began to loosen in fits and starts. The snow melted into slush, then froze again into treacherous sheets of ice. The slow drip of water from the eaves was a constant percussion. One afternoon in late March, as a weak sun tried to warm the earth, Mrs. Higgins appeared at my door. She carried a small basket of early, hardy greens from some hidden greenhouse. "The sap is rising," she said, handing me the basket. Her eyes, sharp as flint, studied my face. The balance was good this year. Strong, the Lord rests deeply. This is a vulnerable time. The veil is still thin in places, patched, but not yet whole. I understood. The great hunger was sated, but other, smaller hungers could still poke through. "Has there been a sign?" I asked. She nodded once. "Old man Davison S. dog went missing 2 nights ago. They found only its collar, cleanly severed, near the stream that borders the fallow field. The work of a straggler, something that slipped through before the door was fully closed. A coldness that had nothing to do with the weather settled in my chest. This was part of the stewardship, the part the ledger only hinted at. What needs to be done? We find it, we send it back, or we end it. She said this with no more emotion than if she were stating a grocery list. "You will come with us tonight. Bring the knife." When darkness fell, I met them at the edge of town. Mr. Absalom was there, along with 2 other men I recognized from the planting. We carried no flashlights. Our eyes had adjusted to the gloom, and the faint, sickly glow of the thing we hunted was visible to those who knew how to look. It was a pale, skittering shape, all limbs and gnashing teeth, caught in our world and furious about it. It reeked of stagnant water and rotten meat. We tracked it to the old covered bridge. It was cornered, hissing, its form flickering between a mangy fox and a hairless, long-limbed child. Mr. Absalom raised his hand, and we fanned out, the flint knives in our hands catching the starlight. There was no battle, no grand struggle. It was a clinical operation. We moved in, a coordinated unit, and when my blade found its mark, the thing didn't scream. It simply unraveled with a sound like tearing silk, its essence dissipating into the cold air until there was nothing left. We stood in the silence afterward. Mr. Absalom clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "It is done," he said. And it was. Walking home, the hum of the world felt right again. The patch had been repaired. I felt a tired satisfaction. This was my purpose, not just the grand ritual of the sighing season, but the year-round maintenance of the quiet, the weeding of the cosmic garden. Now, as I write this, the first green shoots are pushing through the wet earth. The town is stirring, shaking off its winter sleep. People speak of spring planting and summer plans. I listen and I smile, and I make the appropriate comments. But my mind is already on the work to come. The symbols to be carved, the chosen to be observed, the slow, steady preparation for the time when the wind will once again find its voice. The gable house is quiet. The mask on the mantel watches. I am its keeper, and it is my anchor. The ritual must hold. It will hold. I will see to it. The first true warmth of the year arrived today. A heavy, moist heat that promised growth and decay in equal measure. I took the flint knife and walked to the fallow field. The earth was soft and rich beneath my feet. I knelt and began to carve the spiral into the soil, the same motion I had learned a year ago. The action was no longer just meditative. It was foundational. It was the first stitch in the fabric of the coming season. As I worked, I saw others at the edges of their own properties, performing their own versions of the same rite. Mr. Absalom was painting the symbol in a mixture of ash and water on the side of his barn. A woman I did not know by name was weaving it from dried reeds and hanging it above her door. We did not acknowledge each other. Our work was the acknowledgement. Returning home, I saw the children, a new group younger. They were playing near the stream, but their play had a deliberate, almost formal quality. They were building a small cairn of stones, not haphazardly, but with a careful, silent concentration. One of them, a boy with very still eyes, looked up as I passed. He did not smile, but he nodded, just as the girl had the previous year. The recognition passed between us, a silent transfer of responsibility. They were the next ones. They were growing into their purpose. The town is loud now, full of the shrieks and laughter of children who are merely children, of the mundane concerns of lawns and taxes. I move through it all, a quiet current in a bright, noisy stream. I attend the town meeting and listen to debates about the budget for the summer festival. I agree that the fireworks display should be larger this year. The brighter the light, the deeper the shadow it casts. The more joy we cultivate, the richer the harvest when the time comes. Mrs. Higgins stopped by this evening. She did not speak of the straggler we dispatched in the spring, or of the coming ritual. Instead, she talked about her tomato plants and the persistent aphids she was battling. It was a perfectly ordinary conversation. Yet, when she left, she placed a hand on my doorframe, her fingers tracing a small, invisible pattern in the wood. A blessing. A reinforcement. I sit now in my study. The ledger is open. I have recorded the day's work, the carving of the sigil, the sighting of the new chosen. The hum of the world is changing, shifting from the deep, dormant drone of winter to a higher, more vibrant frequency. It is the sound of life at its most potent, of energy building towards a climax. I can feel the veil, thick and sturdy as worn canvas now, but I can also feel the pressure building on the other side. A patient, cosmic weight waiting for its moment. The sighing season is months away, but it is always coming. The work is never truly done. It is a wheel, and we are its keepers, ensuring its eternal, silent turn. I pick up my pen. The ink flows smoothly. I have nothing more to report today, but I write anyway. I write to feel the connection to the line of keepers before me. I write to affirm my place. The mask on the mantel watches, and I write. The heat broke with a sudden, violent thunderstorm that rolled in just after midnight. The lightning did not flash, but instead cast the landscape in a series of stark, frozen tableaus of white light. The thunder was not a boom, but a low, continuous growl that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. I stood at my window and watched the rain lash the streets. It was not cleansing the town. It was anointing it. The next morning, the air was cool and carried the electric tang of ozone. The town was washed clean, but the vibrant green of the lawns and trees seemed deeper, more saturated, as if the storm had injected the very chlorophyll with a dose of potent life. The hum was louder now, a resonant thrum that vibrated in my teeth. I saw the boy with the still eyes again. He was standing alone in the park, staring at a large oak tree. As I approached, I saw what held his attention. A thick, black vine, studded with thorns and flowers the color of old blood, had grown up the trunk overnight. It was a species I did not recognize, and its growth was impossibly fast. I could almost see the tendrils creeping upward. The boy reached out a hand, not to touch it, but to feel the air around it. He turned to me, his expression not of fear, but of assessment. "It's early," he said, his voice quiet. "It is," I agreed. The storm agitated things, woke up more than just the earth. He nodded, his gaze returning to the vine. "It's hungry, but it's not for him, it's for itself." This was the other part of the balance. The lord of the fallow fields demanded his specific tithe, but the thinning of the veil could allow other, lesser things to take root. They were weeds in the spiritual sense, and if left unchecked, they could drain the town's vitality before the true harvest could begin. "I will take care of it," I told him. He simply nodded and walked away. His duty as an observer complete, I returned to the gable house for the flint knife and a pair of thick leather gloves. When I got back to the park, Mr. Absalom was already there, a hatchet in his hand. We worked without speaking, cutting the vine away from the tree. The sap that oozed from the cuts was black and sticky, smelling of vinegar and spoiled honey. The vine itself writhed weakly under our tools, a final, futile protest. We gathered every piece, taking them to the incinerator behind the town hall. We watched the unnatural plant burn, its smoke a foul, greasy plume that the wind seemed to actively avoid. "It's going to be a strong season," Mr. Absalom said, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "The pressure is building faster than I've felt it in years. "The offering will need to be equal to it," I replied. He gave me a long, measuring look. "The chosen are strong this time, but the vessel must also be strong. The gable house has stood for a long time. Its keeper must be a cornerstone." I felt the weight of his words, and the weight of the mask waiting for me on my mantle. I was not just a participant. I was a pillar. The stability of the ritual depended on people like me, on houses like mine, holding firm against the building pressure. "I am a cornerstone," I said, and the words were not a boast, but a simple statement of fact. He clapped me on the shoulder, the same gesture he had used after we dealt with the straggler. It felt like a benediction. Now the town sleeps under a blanket of stars. The air is still, but the silence is not empty. It is a charged silence, a held breath. I can feel the roots growing deeper, the sap rising higher, the energy of this world coalescing. And from the other side of the veil, I feel the corresponding hunger, a vast and patient need, turning its attention toward the growing light of our world. The sighing season is coming, and I am here, waiting. Story 3. The silence on our street that October was not a peaceful one. It was a thick, woolen thing, a muffler pulled tight over the mouth of the world, and in its absence of sound, you could hear the strain of everything trying to make a noise. The scrape of a single oak leaf, brittle and brown, skittering across the asphalt, was a scream. The low, guttural hum of the distant highway was a chorus of giants. This was the silence that fell in the days leading up to Halloween. A silence that felt less like an absence and more like a held breath, a gathering. I am the one who heard it first. My name is of no consequence. I was just a man living in a house on a street like any other, in a town that dressed itself in orange and black every autumn with a kind of dutiful cheer. My wife, Clara, said it was just the weather turning, the animals burrowing in, the children saving their voices for the night of screaming and laughter to come. She was always the practical one, a guardian of the ordinary, her hands dusted with flour from the pumpkin pies she baked, her mind anchored in recipes and to-do lists. But I saw the way her eyes would flicker towards the window as dusk fell, a deep umber bleeding into the sky, and how her hand would linger on the lock of the back door after she'd already turned it twice. The omens began subtly, woven into the festive tapestry of the season. It started with the pumpkins. We bought 3 from the patch at Miller S. Farm, fat and lopsided and perfect. Clara S. was a classic triangle-eyed smile. Mine was a lopsided, comical wink. Our daughter, Lily, too young to carve, but old enough to point with a sticky, juice-shiny finger, had a tiny gourd of her own. But when I plunged my hand into the first one, the sensation was wrong. It wasn't just the cold, slippery pulp, the seedy mess that usually felt like the guts of the earth. This was warmer, stringier, clinging to my wrist with a tenacity that felt intentional. And the smell, beneath the expected vegetal decay, was coppery, like old pennies or blood. I pulled my hand out fast, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs, and saw nothing but orange glop. Clara laughed at me. "Jumpiest man in Massachusetts," she said, her voice a balm I desperately wanted to believe. The carvings that night felt like a violation. The candlelight from within the jack-o'-lanterns, didn't he flicker with a merry dance? It pulsed. It breathed. The grins we had carved, meant to be jolly, looked like the rictus smiles of skulls in the throbbing gloom, and their light cast shadows that moved with a purpose, stretching long, thin fingers across our porch floorboards. Lily, from her high chair, stopped babbling and stared at them, her small face solemn. She pointed a single, certain finger and said, "Bad man." Clara and I exchanged a look, a silent agreement to dismiss it, to laugh it off. But the words settled in the new silence, a cold stone in a still pond. The next day, a Saturday, the countdown felt more pronounced. 3 days until Halloween. The town was a riot of deliberate spookiness. Synthetic cobwebs clung to every bush and mailbox. Plastic skeletons hung from porches, their bony fingers clicking in the wind. But the line between the fake and the real began to blur. The skeleton old man, Henderson, had strung up on his Victorian porch, seemed to have too many teeth, and its hollow sockets appeared to follow you as you walked past. The scarecrow standing sentinel in the corn maze at the edge of town, a place we called the Whispering Corridor, was just a stuffed flannel shirt and jeans on a cross of wood. But more than one person reported seeing its burlap head turn, slowly, deliberately, to watch the cars go by. I took Lily for a walk that afternoon. The October sun a weak, buttery gold that did nothing to warm the air. The cold was a seep, a dampness that found its way through your layers and into your marrow. The leaves, a magnificent carpet of crimson and burnt orange, crunched underfoot, but the sound was muffled, as if the silence was absorbing it. We passed houses where parents were setting up gravestones on their lawns, and the sight of them digging small holes for the plastic markers sent an unwarranted chill through me. It looked like a rehearsal. That is when I saw the first of the strange trick-or-treaters. It was too early, days before the official night, but a figure stood at the end of the block, perfectly still. It was tall and wore a costume that was just a sheet, like a classic ghost. But the sheet was too long, pooling around its feet on the pavement, and the fabric looked heavy, like wool, not the cheap polyester you buy at a party store. There were no eye holes. It just stood there, facing the house, as if waiting for a door that would not open. Lily, in her stroller, began to whimper. A low, fearful sound I had never heard from her before. I turned us around and walked home, my neck prickling, feeling the weight of that blank, featureless gaze on my back until we rounded the corner. I told Clara about it that night, the words tumbling out in a rush as we stood in our kitchen, the sweet, cinnamony smell of mulling cider on the stove doing little to comfort me. She listened, her arms crossed, her face a mask of forced calm. It was just a kid in a costume, Alex, a clumsy one, probably from one of the older families out by the old mills. Their traditions are different. She was trying to be the guardian of our social order, the voice of respectability that insisted everything had a logical, mundane explanation. But her eyes betrayed her. They were wide, the pupils dark and deep, and in them I saw the same unease that was curdling in my own gut. The following night, the silence was broken. It was a Sunday, 2 days until Halloween. The wind picked up a low moan in the eaves, carrying with it the smell of wood smoke and the distant, tinny laughter of a television show. Then the doorbell rang. It was past 9, too late for visitors. Clara and I looked at each other from the couch. The chime was wrong, too. It was our bell, but the tone was distorted, stretched out, ending in a sizzle of static. I went to the door, my footsteps loud in the hush. I peered through the peephole. The porch was empty, but on the welcome mat lay a single, perfect apple, its skin a deep, unnatural crimson, and beside it, a small, muddy footprint. It was too long, too narrow, with toes that looked preternaturally articulated. I did not sleep well. My dreams were filled with the image of that faceless ghost standing at the end of an endless corn maze, the rustle of the dried stalks not from the wind, but from something moving between them, something that slithered and shuffled. I woke with a start, the taste of copper and rotten pumpkin in my mouth, the digital clock on my bedside table reading 3:13 a.m. The house was cold. I got up to check the thermostat, and on my way past Lily S. room, I heard it. A whisper. It was not the wind. It was a voice, dry as dead leaves, speaking a single, looping phrase. The veil is thin. The harvest is due. I pushed her door open. The room was bathed in the soft glow of her nightlight, shaped like a friendly moon. Lily was asleep, her chest rising and falling peacefully. But on the floor, in the middle of her rug, was a scattering of candy corn. It was arranged not randomly, but in a distinct spiral pattern. A spiral that seemed to turn slowly if you stared at it for too long. Monday, Halloween Eve. The dread was a physical presence in the house now, a fourth occupant that followed us from room to room. The town's festive preparations seemed to have reached a fever pitch, but the joy was gone, replaced by a frantic, desperate energy. The jack-o'-lanterns on every porch step seemed to be leering, their candle-eyes knowing. The enormous harvest moon rose early, a great, diseased orange balloon that seemed to press down on the rooftops, its light sickly and pervasive. Clara, finally shaken from her skepticism, refused to let Lily out of her sight. We were the vulnerable ones now, caught in forces we could not name or understand. That afternoon, we drove to the supermarket for a last-minute errand, a futile attempt at normalcy. In the parking lot, we saw a group of teenagers, their faces hidden behind grotesque masks, a weeping clown, a demon with too many eyes, a plastic witch with a warty green face. They were laughing, but the sound was harsh, jagged. As we passed, they fell silent in unison. All their masked heads turned to watch us, and I felt a cold so profound it seemed to stop my heart for a beat. It was the same feeling ID had with the sheeted ghost, a feeling of being seen, not by children, but by something ancient and patient hiding behind the cheap plastic. That night, the whispers started for real. They were in the walls, a sibilant chorus just below the threshold of clear hearing. The veil is thin. The harvest is due. We put Lily to bed, our hands trembling as we tucked her in. Clara S.'s face was pale, her composure shattered. She was no longer a guardian of order, but a frightened woman, and in her fear, I saw the true depth of the horror. We were not being haunted. We were being prepared. Halloween morning dawned gray and cold, the sky the color of wet ash. The silence was back, deeper and more profound than ever. It was the silence of a held breath before a plunge. We went through the motions. We dressed Lily in her costume, a simple ladybug outfit we had bought months ago, when the holiday was still an abstract concept of fun. The red of the fabric looked too much like blood in the grim morning light. As dusk began to bleed into the horizon, the first trick-or-treaters arrived. They were the little ones, shepherded by nervous parents, their laughter too bright, too brittle. We dropped candy into their bags, our smiles feeling like cracks in porcelain. The normalcy of it was the most terrifying thing of all. It was the mask, and we all knew the real face was waiting beneath. Then, as full dark fell, they came. They moved through the twilight streets, not in chaotic, sugar-fueled packs, but in a slow, solemn procession. They were the ones in the old costumes, the homemade ones, the ones that felt less like disguises and more like vestments. The sheeted ghosts, their faceless heads swaying. The scarecrows, with straw poking from their sleeves, their movements stiff and jerky. Figures in black robes that trailed on the ground. They did not run or shout. They walked, their footsteps silent on the carpet of leaves, and they stopped at every house, not to receive a gift, but to stand and observe. A group of them gathered on our lawn, a silent, waiting circle. Their stillness was more menacing than any threat. One of them, a tall figure in a moth-eaten black suit and a pale, expressionless mask, stepped forward. It did not ring the bell. It simply stood at the foot of the porch steps and lifted a long, pale hand, pointing directly at our front door. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Lily, in my arms, began to cry, a thin, reedy sound of pure terror. The thing on our lawn did not move. It was waiting, and I understood. This was not about candy. This was a ritual. The decorations, the pumpkins, the costumes, the candy, it was all an offering, a preparation for this one night when the veil was not just thin, but torn. We had been celebrating the door, and now something was coming to walk through it. The figure on the lawn tilted its head. From behind the smooth, porcelain-like mask, a voice emerged, a dry rustle that was not a whisper, but a command that bypassed the ears and went straight into the mind. The harvest is due, it said. You have sown the seeds. You have carved the flesh. You have lit the way. Now the offering must be made. It wasn't T pointing at the house. It was pointing at Lily. A primal roar tore from my throat, a sound I didn't know I could make. I slammed the door and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. Clara was sobbing, clutching Lily to her chest. We backed away into the living room, the pulsing, breathing light from our own jack-o'-lanterns throwing monstrous shadows around us. The doorbell began to ring, not in a chime, but in a single, sustained, ear-splitting note that went on and on. The windows began to frost over from the outside in, the ice forming not in random patterns, but in intricate, spiraling designs that mirrored the candy corn on Lily S. floor. This was the climax. This was the revelation. The horror of Halloween was not the monsters we pretended to be. It was the ancient, hungry thing that used our pretending as a gateway. Our traditions were its liturgy. Our joy was its invitation. I knew what I had to do. It was in the stories, the oldest ones, the ones whispered before they became children's tales. The stories of Stingy Jack, trapped between worlds. The stories of the thinning veil. The offering had to be made, but didn't he have to be the one they wanted? I ran to the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a fist on a coffin lid. I grabbed the largest, sharpest knife from the block. Clara screamed my name, but I was already back in the living room, heading not for the door, but for the fireplace. On the mantel sat the 3 jack-o'-lanterns, their grins now savage and knowing in the throbbing light. You want a harvest? I yelled at the windows, at the ringing door, at the silent, waiting things outside. You want flesh. You want a light to guide you. Here. I plunged the knife into the first pumpkin, Clara S., with the triangle eyes. I didn't carve it. I gutted it. I hacked and slashed at it, sending pulpy orange chunks and guttering candle wax flying across the room. The light inside it flared, a brief, violent orange, and then died. The ringing doorbell stuttered. I moved to the next, my own, the lopsided wink. I smashed it with the butt of the knife, crushing it, stomping on it until it was a wet, shapeless mass on our hardwood floor. The second light died. The ringing stopped, replaced by an angry, buzzing hum. The third pumpkin was Lily S. Tiny One. I picked it up. It was cold, unnaturally so. I could feel a faint vibration coming from within its small, round body. This was the heart of it. This was the anchor. I didn't cut it. I held it in my hands, and I spoke to the thing outside, to the ancient silence that had started it all. You don't get her, I whispered, my voice raw. You don't get this house. You don't get this night. The offering is refused. I threw the little pumpkin into the fireplace, onto the grate where we had yet to light the first fire of the season. For a moment, nothing happened. Then it exploded, not with fire, but with a sound, a vast, silent shriek that tore through the fabric of the air. The windows rattled in their frames. The frost patterns shattered and melted instantly. Outside, the silent figures on the lawn shuddered, their forms blurring, becoming insubstantial for a moment, like smoke. And then they were gone. The silence returned, but it was different. It was the normal, empty silence of a late autumn night. The oppressive weight was lifted. The pulsing light from the destroyed jack-o'-lanterns was gone, leaving us in the mundane glow of a table lamp. Clara, weeping with relief, clung to Lily, who had quieted, her wide eyes confused, but no longer terrified. We had won. We had turned back the harvest. We had defended our home. We never spoke of it again, not directly. It became the unspoken thing, the shared dream we pretended to forget. Lily grew up. Clara's hair turned gray. We moved away from that town, from that street, the following spring. We thought we had escaped, but every October, as the air turns crisp and the leaves begin to die, I feel it. The silence begins to deepen, to thicken. It is a patient silence, and in the windows of the new houses we live in, reflected in the dark glass as dusk falls on October 30th, I sometimes see them, standing on the lawn behind me. The faceless ghost, the man in the pale mask. Their forms are faint, like afterimages burned onto the retina. They do not approach. They do not ring the bell. They just wait, because Halloween is not just one night. It is a door, and a door once opened can never be truly closed. The veil is always thin somewhere. The harvest is always due. The laughter of children in masks will always echo, and the candles in the jack-o'-lanterns will always flicker, not with merriment, but with a slow, hungry pulse. They are out there, in the spaces between the falling leaves, in the whispers of the wind through the bare branches, in the sugary scent of candy that masks the smell of decay. They are waiting for the invitation to be issued once more. The story does not end here. It simply pauses, waiting for the right listener on the right October night to begin again. The first year in the new house, I smashed every pumpkin Clara brought home from the patch. I told her I had developed an allergy, a lie so flimsy she just stared at me, her eyes full of a knowing, shared dread. We stopped carving them altogether. We turned off the porch light on Halloween and sat in the back of the house with the television loud, pretending we weren't home. We were exiles from a festival we once loved. Lily, of course, grew up and wanted to participate. When she was 7, she begged to be a fairy for Halloween. The sight of her in that cheap, glittery costume, a wand in her hand, sent a jolt of pure terror through me that was far worse than anything I'd felt that night on the old porch. I said no. I was firm, bordering on cruel. Her tears felt like a punishment I deserved. Clara tried to mediate, but the fear in her eyes mirrored my own. We were a united front of trauma, and our daughter was its collateral damage. That was the beginning of the rift. A quiet one, but deep. We were not protecting her from monsters under the bed. We were protecting her from the monsters we knew were real, monsters that wore the skin of tradition. She could not understand, and we could not explain. The years turned. The world moved on, but we remained stuck in that one October. I took a job that required frequent travel, especially in the fall. It was a convenient excuse, a way to be away from the gathering dark and the accusatory silence in my own home. Clara never called me on it. She understood the flight instinct because she lived with the freeze. It was on one of these trips, in a sterile hotel room in a city far from any cornfield, that I saw it again. It was late September. I had the local news on for background noise, a story about a town's annual fall festival. The camera panned across a pumpkin display, hundreds of them lit from within, a sea of flickering orange. And there, in the crowd of families, I saw a tall figure in a moth-eaten black suit. The camera lingered for a half-second on a pale, expressionless mask turned directly toward the lens. Then it was gone, the image cutting back to the smiling news anchor. My blood turned to ice. It was not a memory. It was a message. You can run, but the door is everywhere. I came home after that trip, a different man. The low-grade anxiety that was my constant October companion had sharpened into a focused paranoia. I started noticing things I had trained myself to ignore. The way the shadows in our new, safe neighborhood seemed to congeal just a little too much at dusk. The way the crows would gather on the telephone wire across the street, not cawing, just watching the house. The faint, coppery taste of rotten pumpkin that would sometimes, inexplicably, fill my mouth when I woke in the night. Lily is 16 now. She thinks her father is a superstitious, broken man. She has her own life, her own friends. She goes to Halloween parties. Last year, she came home with a tiny, tasteful black cat painted on her cheek, laughing about a haunted house she'd gone through. She didn't see the way Clara and I flinched at the word haunted, or how we scrutinized her for any sign of a change, any flicker of something else behind her eyes. This morning, I found it. October 30th. Lying on the welcome mat of our safe, modern house in a neighborhood with an homeowners association that banned excessive holiday decorations. A single, perfect apple. Its skin was a deep, unnatural crimson. I picked it up. It was cold, and it left a faint, sticky residue on my fingers that smelled of blood and damp earth. I didn't tell Clara. I didn't throw it away. I placed it on the kitchen counter, a silent testament. She saw it when she came down for coffee. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked at it, then at me, and the last vestige of hope in her eyes finally went out. The offering was not for them. It never was. It was for us. A reminder of the debt we thought we broke. They are not coming back to terrorize us. They are coming back to collect. The harvest was only postponed, and the price for our defiance, I now understand, will be far greater than we ever imagined. The door is open. It has been open all along. We just refused to look through it. Now, it is looking back. The apple sat between us on the counter, a glossy red accusation. Clara's hand trembled as she set her coffee mug down. The sound was abnormally loud in the thick silence. We didn't need to speak. The memory of that night was a third person in the room, larger and more solid than either of us. Lily came clattering down the stairs, all long limbs and teenage energy, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey, who's the apple for?" she asked, snatching it up before either of us could react. "Dante." The word ripped out of me, harsh and desperate. She froze, startled by the violence in my voice. "God, Dad, relax. It's just an apple." She tossed it from one hand to the other, and I watched, hypnotized by the arc of its crimson path. "Give it to me, Lily," Clara said, her voice a strained thread of calm. She held out her hand. Lily S.'s face shifted from surprise to defiance. "Why?" It was on the counter. "I am hungry." She brought it to her mouth. I moved without thinking. I lunged across the kitchen and slapped the fruit from her hand. It hit the tile floor with a wet, solid thump, but it didn't bruise or crack. It rolled, coming to a perfect, unblemished stop against the toe of Lily S.'s sneaker. The three of us stood there, breathing heavily. Lily S.'s eyes were wide with a confusion that was quickly curdling into anger. "What is wrong with you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "You Ray both so messed up about this Halloween thing. It was years ago. You need therapy." She kicked the apple. It skittered under the kitchen table. Then she turned and stormed out, the front door slamming shut behind her with a finality that felt like a death knell. Clara sank into a chair, her face in her hands. "She doesn't understand." "She can I said, my own hands still clenched into fists. I walked to the table and bent down to retrieve the apple. It was still cold. As my fingers closed around it, a vision flashed behind my eyes, brief and brutal. Not a corn maze, but our own street, draped in unnatural twilight. The faceless figures were not on the lawn. They were in the houses. I saw our neighbors, the Johnsons, sitting at their dinner table, their faces blank, their eyes empty pits, chewing slowly on crimson apples. I dropped the apple as if it had burned me. It rolled back under the table, a stubborn seed of evil in our clean, modern home. "It's not just for us anymore, is it?" Clara asked, her voice hollow. She had seen the terror on my face. I shook my head, unable to form the words. The rules had changed. Our defiance had been a contained incident, a single house refusing the ritual. But the thing in the silence, the patient hunger behind the mask, had adapted. It was no longer asking for a single offering from a single family. It was weaving a wider net, using the threads of an entire community's celebration, their unthinking traditions. Our neighborhood, with its banned excessive decorations, was not a sanctuary. Its very normalcy was the perfect disguise. The harvest was not just due. It was being prepared on a scale I could barely comprehend. The door was open, and now it was inviting everyone in. The rest of the day passed in a fugue state. We went through the motions of life, but every sound was a threat, every shadow a promise. When Lily returned home hours later, the air was thick with everything we couldn't say. She avoided us, retreating to her room, the slamming of her door another small fracture in the foundation of our family. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window in the dark, watching the street. The apple was in the trash, but I could still feel its cold, waxy presence in the house, a poison we had already ingested. Just before dawn, I saw old Mr. Peterson from across the street, a man who usually slept until 9, out in his yard. He was meticulously arranging a line of small, white gourds along his walkway. His movements were slow, deliberate, and utterly vacant. When Clara woke, I told her, color drained from her face. "We have to get out of here," she said. "Today, we'll take Lily and just go. A hotel, anywhere." But even as she said it, we both knew it was futile. The apple had not been delivered by a mailman. It had simply appeared. The influence was already here, seeping into the soil of our safe neighborhood, into the minds of our neighbors. Running was what we had done last time. It had only led us here. The day of Halloween dawned bright and cold. The sense of dread was a physical weight pressing the air from my lungs. Lily, still angry, left for school without a word. We watched her go, our hearts aching with a love that felt like a terminal illness. We were losing her, not to the thing in the silence, but to our own inability to bridge the chasm our fear had carved. Clara, driven by a desperate maternal resolve, went to the store. She returned not with pumpkins, but with bags of salt. "It's in the old stories too," she said, her jaw set in a line I hadn't seen in years. For protection, we didn't speak as we poured a continuous, thin white line across every threshold of our house. The front door, the back door, the sliding glass porch. We salted the windowsills. It felt ridiculous and utterly, terrifyingly necessary. We were building a fortress out of superstition, and we both prayed it would be enough. As dusk began to gather, the neighborhood came to life. It was a perfect, picturesque Halloween. Children in store-bought superhero and princess costumes raced down the sidewalks, their parents following with patient smiles. Houses glowed with orange lights. The air was filled with laughter and the rustle of leaves. But we saw the cracks. We saw the Johnsons, who usually handed out full-size candy bars, standing perfectly still on their porch, their smiles fixed and unmoving. We saw the group of teenagers dressed not as movie slashers, but in the same old, homemade costumes from our memory: a sheet ghost, a scarecrow, a figure in a black robe. They walked slowly, not laughing, their heads turning in unison to look at our house as they passed. They saw the salt line at our front walk. They did not approach. The true horror was not the confrontation we feared, but the normalization of the abnormal around us. The world was putting on its mask, and we were the only ones who knew the face beneath was real. Lily came home just after dark. She saw the salt line and snorted, a sound of pure derision. "You've really lost it," she said, shaking her head as she stepped over the line and into the house. She went upstairs to change, leaving us standing in our silent, salted fortress. The doorbell rang. It was the first trick-or-treater. Clara and I looked at each other. The bowl of candy sat on the table by the door. To open the door was to break the line. To not open it was to draw attention, to mark ourselves as the broken branch in the flowing stream of the ritual. The bell rang again, insistent. Then a small, polite voice called out, "Trick or treat." I made the decision. I walked to the door, my heart hammering, and opened it. A little girl, no more than 5, stood there. She was dressed as a ladybug. The same costume Lily had worn, Her eyes were too old, too knowing. She held out her bag, not smiling. "Hello," I said, my voice rough. She didn't answer. She just stared past me, into the house. I dropped a handful of candy into her bag. Her small, cold fingers brushed against mine. "The harvest is ripe," she said, her voice a perfect, high-pitched echo of the dry rustle from my memory. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the groups of other, normal-seeming children. I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs weak. Clara was staring at me, her eyes wide with a fresh terror. We had broken the salt line. We had participated. We had given an offering. From upstairs, we heard Lily's window slide open. We ran. We took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into her room. She was leaning out the window, looking down at the street. She turned to us, and her face was pale, her anger gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. "Dad," she whispered. "Mom, what are they?" We rushed to the window. Below, on our lawn and on the lawns up and down the street, the figures had gathered. The sheeted ghosts, the scarecrows, the robed figures. They were not looking at the houses handing out candy. They were standing, silent and still, facing our home. And at their center was the tall man in the pale mask, his hand pointing not at our door, but directly up at Lily's window. The invitation had been accepted. The harvest was beginning, and our daughter was the prize we had failed to protect. The salt was just a line on the ground. It could not protect us from a debt that was now due. We stood frozen at the window, a tableau of terror. The figures did not move. They were a silent, waiting audience to our unraveling. The cheerful sounds of the neighborhood, the laughter, the calls of trick or treat seemed to warp, becoming distant and muffled, as if we were hearing them from the bottom of a well. Lily stumbled back from the window, her hand flying to her mouth. "They were just there," she stammered. "I was just getting some air, and they were just there." I pulled her away from the glass, my own body acting on an instinct to shield her that felt laughably inadequate. Clara rushed to the window and yanked it shut, her fingers fumbling with the lock. The click of the latch was a tiny, pathetic sound against the immense silence of the gathering outside. "We have to call the police," Lily said, her voice trembling, the last vestige of her rational world offering a solution. "No," Clara and I said in unison. The word was flat, absolute. "Why not?" Lily's voice rose in panic. "There are creepy people staring at our house." "Because they aren't people," I said, the truth finally spoken aloud in our home. "And the police can't help with this." The doorbell rang again. A long, sustained chime that went on for too many seconds. Then it rang again and again, a frantic, insistent rhythm that was not an invitation, but a demand. Lily flinched with each ring, her eyes wide. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her, erasing her anger, replacing it with a primal fear she had never known. She looked from Clara's ashen face to my own, and she saw no comfort, only a reflection of her own dread. The ringing stopped. In the sudden quiet, we heard a new sound, a soft, scraping noise from the front of the house. We crept back to my bedroom, which faced the front, and peered through the slats of the blinds. Mr. Peterson was on his hands and knees. With a small garden trowel, he was carefully scraping away the line of salt we had poured across our front walk. His movements were methodical, unhurried. He was not being forced. He was performing a duty. Behind him, the man in the pale mask watched, his head tilted in what might have been approval. Our protection was being systematically dismantled by our own neighbor. "They're inside the salt," Clara whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "They're not just outside it anymore. They're in everyone." The scraping stopped. Mr. Peterson stood up, brushed off his knees, and walked back to his own house without a backward glance. The path to our front door was clear. The figures on the lawn began to move. They didn't walk. They glided, a slow, seamless advance toward our house. The man in the pale mask led them, his finger now pointing at our front door. This was it, the final approach, the collection. Lily started to cry, silent, helpless tears. Clara wrapped her arms around her, pulling her close. I looked at my family, my reason for existing, and I knew, with a cold, certain clarity, that I would let the world burn before I let them be taken. I ran downstairs. I didn't have a plan, only a desperate, furious need to fight. I grabbed the fire poker from the hearth. It was solid, heavy, real in my hand. A pathetic weapon against what was coming, but it was all I had. I stood behind the front door, my heart pounding a frantic drum against my ribs. I could hear them on the porch now, a soft, shuffling sound of many feet on the welcome mat. There was no knock, no ring of the bell. The doorknob began to turn. It moved slowly, deliberately. The lock held, but the metal of the knob itself started to frost over, a creeping rime of ice that spread across the brass. The air in the hallway grew cold, so cold I could see my own breath pluming in the dim light. The lock clicked. It was a simple, final sound. The bolt slid back on its own accord. The door, the final barrier between my family and the harvest, began to swing inward. I raised the fire poker, a silent scream building in my throat. The door opened fully, revealing the tall, thin silhouette of the man in the pale mask, framed against the night. The empty eye holes of the mask seemed to drink the light from the hallway, fixing on me. He took a single step across the threshold, and then from the top of the stairs, Lily screamed. Not a scream of terror, but of pure, defiant rage. "Get out of our house." The man in the mask stopped. His head tilted upward toward the sound of her voice. He seemed interested. I swung the fire poker with all my strength. It did not connect with a body. It passed through the space where he stood as if through a column of smoke. The force of the swing sent me stumbling forward, off balance. I caught myself on the doorframe, my hand burning with a cold that felt like touching dry ice. He was still there, untouched, now fully inside our home. He ignored me completely. His gaze was locked on the staircase. He began to glide forward, past me, toward the stairs where my wife and daughter stood. I was nothing to him, an obstacle already bypassed. The true offering was upstairs. The story was not pausing anymore. It was reaching its climax, and we were all trapped on the final page. I scrambled after him, my boots slipping on the suddenly icy floorboards. He moved with an impossible, silent grace, floating up the stairs as if they were not there. Clara was pulling Lily back toward her bedroom, but they were too slow. They would never be fast enough. A guttural sound tore from my throat, part sob, part war cry. I threw myself at his back, not with the poker this time, but with my own body, a desperate, clumsy tackle. I didn't expect to stop him. I only hoped to be a distraction, a momentary shield, my arms wrapped around nothing. There was no substance, only a profound, soul-numbing cold that seared through my jacket and into my skin. I fell through him, crashing against the stairs, my vision swimming with pain. I looked up, gasping, my breath white in the frigid air. He had reached the top. He stood before Clara and Lily, who were backed against the wall, trapped. Lily was sobbing openly now, her defiance shattered. Clara held her tight, her own eyes wide with a terror beyond screaming. The man in the mask raised his hand, not in a fist, but with his palm open. It was a gesture of demand, not violence. He was waiting. Then his head turned, not to Clara, not to Lily, but to the open door of Lily S.'s bedroom. His attention shifted, drawn by something we couldn't see. On Lily S.'s desk, beside her laptop, and a stack of textbooks, the apple sat. It was whole, unblemished, its crimson skin glowing faintly in the dark room. It had never been in the trash. It had simply moved, waiting for this moment. The man in the mask glided into her room. He hovered over the desk, his form seeming to drink the light from the small lamp. He reached out a long, pale finger and touched the apple S skin, a single, perfect leaf, green and vibrant, sprouted from its stem. It was a perversion of life, a mockery of growth. He turned back to us, the apple now cradled in his palm. He looked from me, still sprawled on the stairs, to Clara and Lily, huddled together. He gave a single, slow nod. It was not a gesture of thanks. It was a confirmation. The offering was not a child, not a life in the way we understood it. It was an acknowledgement, a signature on a contract we had tried to tear up. He turned and walked back down the stairs. He passed through the still-open front door and melted into the crowd of waiting figures on the lawn. As one, they turned and drifted away, dissolving into the shadows between the houses, into the ordinary night. The cold in the house began to recede. The frost on the doorknob melted, dripping onto the floor. The cheerful sounds of Halloween returned, normal and loud and heartbreaking. We huddled together at the top of the stairs, shaking, unable to speak. We had paid. The debt was settled. But as I looked at the empty space where he had stood, and then at the profound, silent trauma on my daughter S. face, I knew the truth. The harvest was not of bodies, but of peace, of normalcy, of the future. They had taken our sense of safety, and they had taken Lily S. innocence. They had left us with a hollowed-out house and the certain knowledge that the door, once opened, could never be truly closed. The harvest was over, but the field was left fallow and barren, and we were left to tend to the silence. We stayed there for a long time, a tangle of limbs and shuddering breaths. No one moved to shut the front door. The world outside was a mockery of celebration, a lie we could no longer believe. Eventually, Clara stirred. She gently pried herself from Lily S. grip and walked on unsteady legs to Lily S. room. She emerged a moment later, her face a mask of grim confirmation. "It has gone," she said. "The apple is gone." Lily finally looked at me, her eyes red-raw. "What was that, Dad?" Her voice was a small, broken thing. What did we just give him? I had no answer that would make sense. I could only tell her the truth as I understood it. "A piece of our peace," I said. "A piece of our world." We slept in our bed that night, all three of us, like we had when Lily was a child afraid of thunderstorms. But no one truly slept. Every creak of the house, every distant shout from the dying Halloween festivities sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through us. We were waiting for a sound that did not come. The next morning, the neighborhood was quiet. The decorations were still up, looking garish and foolish in the gray November light. People were taking them down, packing away the fake cobwebs and orange lights. They waved to each other, called out about the weather. It all looked so normal, but we saw the differences. We saw Mrs. Gable, who always had a bright good morning for everyone, standing perfectly still on her porch, just staring at the sky. We saw the group of teenagers who had worn the old costumes, now dressed in their normal clothes, walking to the bus stop. They didn't laugh or shove each other. They walked in a tight, silent group, their eyes distant. They had participated in a different way. They had been the vessels, the instruments, and it had left a mark. Lily didn't go to school. Clara called her in sick. We spent the day in a kind of numb, shared paralysis. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. It was a stain on the air, on the walls. That evening, as I forced myself to take out the trash, I saw Mr. Peterson. He was watering his lawn, a mundane, everyday task. He saw me and gave a small, polite wave. There was no recognition in his eyes of what he had done, no memory of scraping away our salt line with a garden trowel. He was just a neighbor again, but as I turned to go back inside, I saw it. Lying in the grass by his feet, where he had been kneeling the night before, was a single, perfect white gourd. It was uncarved, pristine, and from its stem, a small green leaf had sprouted. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. The ritual was over, but the roots remained. It was in the soil now. It was in them. And we, who knew its face, were utterly alone. We had saved our daughter, but we had lost our place in the world. We were the keepers of a terrible secret, living in a ghost town that didn't know it was haunted. The harvest was over, but the growing season had just begun. The days that followed were a study in silence. We moved through the house like ghosts ourselves, flinching at the mail slot-esque clatter, the phone-esque ring. Lily stopped asking questions. She just watched us, her eyes old and cautious, as if she were waiting for one of us to put on a mask and reveal we had been one of them all along. A week after Halloween, the first frost came, killing the last of the summer flowers. I looked out the kitchen window and saw Mr. Peterson in his yard. He was not clearing the dead plants. He was carefully planting something in a neat, straight row. The soil was dark and rich, almost black against the pale November sun. He patted the earth down with a tenderness I had never seen in him. Clara came up beside me. "What is he planting this late?" she asked, her voice low. We both knew it wasn't a question about gardening. The world continued its charade. At the grocery store, people talked about Thanksgiving plans and holiday sales. Their conversations were a foreign language we could no longer speak. We bought our food and left quickly, the fluorescent lights feeling like an interrogation. Lily tried to go back to school. She lasted 2 days. On the third morning, she refused to get out of bed. "They look at me," she whispered into her pillow. "The kids who were dressed up. They don't say anything. They just look, and they know." So she stayed home. We didn't fight it. What was the point? The lessons they were teaching in school had nothing to do with the world we now inhabited. I found myself drawn to the window each evening, watching the neighborhood. The patterns were there, if you knew how to look. The same people at the same time, performing the same small, meaningless tasks. Watering lawns that didn't need it. Trimming hedges that were already perfect. It was a pantomime of normal life, a ritual to maintain the facade. They were tending to something else, something just beneath the surface. One afternoon, a package arrived. It was addressed to Lily. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in plain brown paper, was a small porcelain doll. It was dressed in a simple, old-fashioned gown. Its face was painted with a serene, faint smile, and in its porcelain hand, it held a tiny, perfect apple, painted a glossy, impossible red. Lily took one look at it and ran from the room. We heard her retching in the bathroom. Clara picked up the doll with a towel, her hands shaking. We didn't speak. We took it out back to the metal trash can. I poured lighter fluid over it and lit a match. The flames roared, consuming the brown paper, the gown, the serene face. But when the fire died down, the doll remained. It was smudged with soot, but utterly unharmed. The apple in its hand gleamed as brightly as ever. We left it in the bottom of the can, a silent, indestructible witness. That night, I dreamed of a field. It was vast and empty, under a sky the color of a day-old bruise. In the center of the field stood the man in the pale mask. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the soil. He knelt down and pressed his hand against the earth. And where he touched, something pale and slender pushed its way up through the dirt. It wasn't a plant. It was a finger. I woke up gasping, the taste of cold soil in my mouth. The seasons turned. Thanksgiving came and went, a quiet, joyless meal. We put up a Christmas tree because it was expected, but its lights felt like a lie. The world outside our windows was celebrating, but in our house, the silence had taken root. It was a living thing, growing in the corners, fed by our fear. We had given them an offering to leave us alone, but we were starting to understand that being left alone was its own kind of haunting. We're the forgotten crop, left to wither in a field everyone else had forgotten. The harvest was over, but the waiting had just begun. The first snow fell just before Christmas, a thick, blanketing silence that made the world outside seem clean and new. It was a lie. The snow just covered the tracks. I started seeing them in the early mornings, a single set of footprints that would appear overnight, leading from the woods at the end of our street to our front walk, where they would stop and then lead back. No one else seemed to notice them. The plow drivers, the paper boys, they just drove over them, obliterating the evidence of the night's visitation without a second thought. Lily found the first one on the morning of Christmas Eve. It was on her windowsill, outside the locked pane. A small, white gourd, identical to the one I had seen by Mr. Peterson's feet. It was dusted with snow, and from its stem, that same impossibly green leaf stood in defiant contrast to the winter gray. She didn't scream. She just came and got us, her face a careful, hollow calm. We looked at it together, the three of us, a silent family portrait of dread. We didn't remove it. We were afraid to touch it. It sat there, a perfect, round accusation. That afternoon, Clara was cleaning out the fireplace from the night before. She called my name, her voice tight. I came in to find her holding the fireplace poker I had swung at the man in the mask. She wasn't holding the handle. She was holding the iron tip. It was cold, of course, but that wasn't it. The metal was different. It was no longer a uniform dark gray. It was streaked with a deep, rusty brown, the color of old blood, and threaded through with veins of a dull, silvery white. "It looks like petrified wood," she whispered, running a thumb over the strange grain. "Or bone." I took it from her. It was heavier than before, and the cold of it seeped into my palm with a familiar, invasive chill. The weapon I had raised against the unreal had been touched by it, changed by it. It was no longer just a fire poker. It was a relic. We hid it in the basement, behind the old water heater, as if that could contain its meaning. Christmas Day was a quiet, strained affair. We exchanged gifts, but our hearts weren't in it. The only thing that felt real was the white gourd on the windowsill, a constant, uninvited guest at our feast. As dusk began to settle, painting the snow blue, Lily went to her room and came back down holding her winter coat. "I want to go for a walk," she said. Clara and I exchanged a look of pure panic. "Honey, it's getting dark," Clara said, her voice carefully gentle. "I know," Lily said. She zipped up her coat. "I need to see it. I need to see if the whole world is like this now, or just us." It was the most she had said in weeks. The resolve in her eyes was fragile, but it was there. We could either chain her in this house of fear forever, or we could go with her. We put on our coats and boots, a solemn procession. We stepped out into the biting cold, the snow crunching under our feet. The neighborhood was postcard perfect. Christmas lights glowed from eaves, smoke curled from chimneys. It looked peaceful. It looked safe. We walked without a destination, our breaths pluming in the air. We saw families through windows, gathered around trees, laughing. It all looked so normal. For a moment, a treacherous sliver of hope began to worm its way into my heart. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe it was over. Then we turned the corner onto Maple Street. The houses here were darker, fewer lights, and in every front yard, standing in the snow, was a single white gourd. They were placed with deliberate care in the center of each lawn, like a marker. Some had green leaves. Some had tiny white buds that looked like they were ready to bloom. The people who lived here were outside, too. They weren't building snowmen or shoveling walks. They were just standing on their porches or in their driveways, still and silent, watching the street. They wore their normal clothes, their winter jackets and knitted hats. But their faces were empty. They were waiting. One of them, a man I recognized from the town council, turned his head as we passed. His eyes met mine. There was no hostility in them, no recognition. There was only a deep, patient emptiness, like a well that had never seen the sun. Lily stopped walking. She was staring at a house at the end of the street. It was the only one with its lights fully on, blazing against the twilight. In its picture window, we could see a family, a mother, a father, a little boy decorating their tree. They were laughing, the boy hanging a crooked ornament with intense concentration. They were like we had been. They didn't know. As we watched, a figure emerged from the shadows between two houses and walked toward their front door. It was a woman, dressed in a pale, shimmery dress that seemed too thin for the cold. Her face was bare, but her movements were the same fluid glide. She carried a small wicker basket. Inside it, we could see the gleam of white gourds. She didn't knock. She simply placed the basket on their front step, turned, and walked away, fading back into the shadows. The family inside didn't notice. They kept laughing, kept decorating. Lily reached out and gripped my hand, her own small and cold. Her question from that first night came back to me, unanswered. What did we just give him? Looking at the oblivious family in the bright window, and then at the silent, waiting sentinels in the dark yards around us. I thought I finally understood. We didn't give him a thing. We gave him our attention. We acknowledged him. And in doing so, we became part of his story. We were the warning that went unheeded, the ghost story told in a whisper. We were the soil, and the gourds were the seeds. The next harvest was already being planted, and we were here to watch it grow. We turned for home, the festive lights of our own street now seeming like a taunt. The walk back was much, much longer,